Welcome everyone to another episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast. Doing things a little bit differently today because we are going to be talking some major spoilers. Spoilers. This episode is all about us talking about The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2. We're going to talk about our thoughts about the overall plots. So, spoilers. If you are not interested in hearing any of that, I'm probably going to put the word spoilers in the thumbnail as well. Leave the episode now. If you haven't played the game yet, go play it or do whatever you want. Or if you're just here to get spoiled anyways, then please enjoy. So, with you today, I am one of your hosts, Ryan. And today we also have with us Paul.
Hey, how's it going?
And also Mark, the other guy, as he's so dubbed himself.
What's going on? Wait, you said there was going to be spoilers on this episode?
So many spoilers.
Mark's out. That's it.
I gotta play it in the background.
It's going to look like a Fast and Furious movie with so many spoilers.
Yes, let's do it.
And speaking of things that we don't actually have much experience with, so this episode was more inspired by me and Paul, as we have played both Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 and have many thoughts to discuss on that. And Mark has decided to join us out of curiosity today. Isn't that right?
Spot on. I have never played the game, but I feel like I know exactly what the game is about purely by reading all of these fantastic reviews on Metacritic. Sarcasm.
Yeah, also, it's because you are more of a newcomer to the PlayStation ecosystem, where the Last of Us games are exclusive to, developed by Naughty Dog, paid for by Sony. So you've been curious about what Sony exclusives you may have been missed out on, and I take it that this is also a set of games where you're kind of not ready to fully invest, but are curious enough that you're going to at least be in on the conversation today.
Absolutely. I'm very interested to hear how you guys thought of the game, or games, I should say.
Yeah, this is definitely a unique pair of games. But before we get into that, Paul, was there anything specific you wanted to say about The Last of Us?
No, I mean, I'll just say that I thought Last of Us was awesome. It was certainly an epic game. I think that's, goes without saying. And I was a little bit late to the game in playing the first one. I think I played it in, I want to say 2015, so a couple of years after it came out. But it just hooked me right away, right from the beginning, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. So yeah, definitely a revolutionary game. I guess you could say at the time. I know it's probably one of the first one, at least, is one of the better reviewed games, maybe of all time. So yeah, big fan and excited to talk about my feelings on both.
Right, and actually that's a good point there, is just to start with our basics on how we feel about the game so people can kind of understand how we're coloring the conversation from our perspectives. So yes, I played Last of Us, the original Last of Us, on PlayStation 3 when it originally came out. Very much sold from all the promotional material right away. The game itself is notable for pushing the boundaries of game storytelling, and while that's semi-debatable, I would say that the mature tones and the theming and writing is very much a boundary pusher for video games as a medium. Gameplay wise, it's exceptionally good gameplay, but it's not anything too new. In fact, that's one thing I would say to Mark, slightly in jest, is that actually this game would probably be feeling pretty familiar to you, or give you a little bit of comfort, because it can be very similar to Gears of War in that cover shooting is a primary mechanic. There's a more of a bit of a stealth and measured combat. It's not quite as run wall gun as Gears of War, but
yeah,
you get what I'm saying. There's
absolutely
similarities there.
Yeah, and to Paul's note too, I think what kind of captivated my interest with the game, or games and series, I guess, like he's spot on. Like the reviews have always been way up there. Metacritic gave the first one a 9.2, which is definitely up there. Not a 10, but a 9.2 in terms of just general gaming. I feel like that's very much in there. Actually, I apologize. It's a 9.2 user score, 95 critic score, which is even
Oh, wow.
that much better.
Yep.
Yeah. I've played Dead Space. I've played other third person kind of like zombie-esque altered reality type games, which I think is what brought that similarity. It was always on the top 10 PlayStation selling games. So that's why, going back a few months, flashing back, when I first got the PlayStation from you, again, thank you. I, was looking through like, what have I kind of missed in the last 10, 20 years, whatever it may be. And Last of Us was all over the place. And that's where I sort of discovered the controversial part 2, which whether we want to talk about that now or not. And
I've got a lot to say about part 2.
We'll get into it. Yeah.
I've got a lot to say about it.
I figured as much. So that's kind of why I wanted to be part of this conversation, just kind of like hear your guys' experience throughout the first 2 games.
Yeah, so I played the original on PlayStation 3. I did play the DLC. I played some of the factions, and I did enjoy both the factions mode, which was the multiplayer mode in Last of Us 1, and the DLC story expansion, which I thought was quite unique for the time. And then I played Last of Us Part 2 immediately as soon as I could on the PlayStation 4 using my PlayStation 4 Pro. I eagerly await it to get some sort of either update patch or revision for PlayStation 5 so it unlocks 60 frames per second. There's supposedly a multiplayer mode is coming as well, whether that's an expansion to the game or like a free standalone game, or not even free, I was assuming that, or some sort of standalone thing. I probably will check that out, but the multiplayer I'm not itching to go back to, especially with not a lot of people in my friend group who would probably be playing it. So that's my current feelings on Last of Us. I really enjoy the pair of games here. So Paul, if you just want to quickly recap, your experience with those.
Yeah, I won't get into anything too detailed yet.
Yeah, just what you played.
Yeah, so I played, like I said, I played the first one in 2015, so a little bit late. I played the second one in 2020, not too long after it came out. So that one, I was a little more ready for that one after playing the first one. I didn't want to really waste much time. So I got through both of them pretty fast because they're the kind of games, as I'm sure you know, that you're addicted because of the story. And that's one thing I want to get into as we go forward with our discussions, is the story really captivates you. I think that's part of the appeal of these games. Like you mentioned, like the story is very in depth. The voice acting is really good. Script is good. So that's what really grabbed me more than the gameplay itself.
Sure.
Was like I just wanted to keep getting more of this story. So both games I got through really fast. I definitely enjoyed the first one a lot more than the second one. That's not to say the second one was bad or that I didn't like it, but I did enjoy the first one a lot more, and we'll get into the reasons why for that. But yeah, so that's just a little overview there.
Did you play the DLC expansion for Last of Us Part 1?
I did, and I thought it was kind of unnecessary, or I don't want to say unnecessary, but it was fine. I don't know. I guess I'm not a huge fan of most DLC to begin with. I mean, they added a little bit to the storyline, but like the scenes they had, like there was that scene where in between, where Joel was hurt and Ellie had to fend off the bad guys. I didn't think that was really necessary. I mean, we can kind of gather that that's what happened anyway. I didn't think we needed to see it or play it. The scene, I thought the one where she was with her friend before they got infected was a little bit better. Although again, I mean, we kind of knew that because she had told it a little bit throughout the game. So I didn't think really either one was needed. Like I wasn't like, oh man, I needed this. So glad they made this DLC content. Like I would have been fine without it. But I did like the DLC with her and her friend a little bit better. But yeah, overall, I didn't think it was anything special.
Oh, and just to clarify for our listeners as well, it was one DLC, but the story bounced between 2 parts. There was a present and it was flashing back. And also, I just did want to mention, I rebought Last of Us remastered version for PlayStation 4 so I could play it at 60 frames per second, and I did replay it then as well, replayed the DLC, so that was a much better experience as well.
Was it?
So yeah, definitely 60 frames per second makes a huge difference for games, not only just in responsiveness, but the clarity of it. And I realize not everyone is as sensitive to that as everyone else. So, but I would recommend if you have a PlayStation 4, the remastered version is definitely better than the original, and it
Mm,
includes all the DLC. So it's and probably cheaper at this point. And if you have a
yeah.
PlayStation 5, Last of Us Remastered is included as part of the PlayStation Plus collection if you have a existing
Ooh,
PlayStation uh, Plus or subscription. So,
that's cool.
okay, so Paul, you and I have talked about this a bit off the air, but why don't you go in and start sharing your thoughts on Last of Us 1, Last of Us 2, and or whatever you wanted to talk about today? Because I know there's a whole bunch of thoughts here, and the events between 1 and 2 intertwine about the different things we're going to bring up. So go ahead, handle it however you want.
Okay, yeah, I'll go through a little bit of everything. My original idea when we had talked about this before was to like, well, let's go through everything about 1, and then we could kind of dissect that and go through our opinions, and then shift over to 2. But like you said, there's so much, especially with the story, that overlaps and interweaves with
Hmm.
each other and things like that. So I think it's at least for me, I kind of want to go through everything at once, different
Mm-hmm.
aspects of it, and especially ones that connect with each other. So I'm going to do that. Feel free to chime in with your opinions as well, because I know you have a lot. So, yeah, well, first of all, so I'll start out with my feelings on 1. So, like I mentioned earlier, I played it a couple years after it came out. I had always heard great things. I had heard everybody, talking about it like this is such a great game and, all that. But one of my reservations with playing it, one of the reasons why I hadn't played it is because I'm not great at shooting games. I love Resident Evil, as we talked about, but I love Resident Evil more for the survival horror aspect. Once it became more of a shooting game in 5 and 6, I didn't care for it. I'm
Hmm.
just not great at shooting games. That's one of my issues. But anyway, so once I finally played it, and you have that opening sequence, which is you initially play as Joel's daughter, and you have that. That whole scene where it's kind of the first night of the infection, things are going down, you have a lot of stuff happening in the background,
Hmm.
and you play a little bit, you have the scenes where you're kind of running away, but overall it's more about the story. And that first scene, I'm sure anybody who's played the game will agree with me, where they encounter the soldier, and Joel's daughter gets shot and basically dies in his arms.
Hmm.
Like right there, I was captivated. I'm like, this game has me hooked already. Like that's whatever it is, 5-10 minutes into the game.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm so emotionally invested because like that whole scene. I thought it was just a perfect way to start it, because it gets you emotionally hooked, and it it makes you, because so Joel, like I said, you start playing as Joel's daughter, but the main character throughout the game is Joel, because once that scene happens, it flashes 20 years into the future, and you see Joel's older, he's rugged, he's been through a lot, he's a smuggler, all that kind of stuff. But you immediately identify with him because of that opening scene. Like I feel like it's very important if you're playing as a character, you want to be able to identify them. You want that. I don't know. You want to have that role be something that you could connect with, and because of that opening scene, you immediately connect with him. So I thought it was just a perfect way. I was so hooked. um,
Yeah, I think
and then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think that it's so powerful how Joel, like Sarah is the name of his daughter, like the whole way she dies, like you play as her, you get this perspective, but I think it really sums it up with none of the material showed her, so you kind of knew what was coming. You just didn't know how it
Right,
happened.
right,
And so
exactly.
this
Yeah,
idea that she wasn't even like bitten by infected. What happened was a soldier who's following orders, and this is kind of a story trope and like a moral conundrum is this crazy thing is happening. Joel is just trying to protect his daughter. He just wants to get out. He's pleading with authority to just please let us be an exception here. Like just he's trying to reach out with humanity, and unfortunately, it just doesn't work out. The soldier shoots shoots her, and we see Sarah die in Joel's arms. So that whole sequence of events there, I feel, is just the ultimate way of like someone you care about dying over forces you can't control, but it's not even that. It was another person. It's just
Yeah.
I think that whole sequence is something that people can relate to and understand the struggle of in some regard is like something or someone more specifically that you care about is taken away by another person, and the callousness, the oh, I'm trying to think of the word, the lack of
Like of
ca-
empathy, is that a good word? I don't know.
I don't know if it's empathy, but it's like callousness, I guess, is like the best thing I can say is just the callous, cruel reality of that situation, and not being able to do anything about it. And I do love the symbolism also of the watch breaking. So it's like that's when
Yes.
time stopped for Joel.
Yeah, I thought it was. I thought it was an important point to have them be killed by, or to have her be killed by a soldier rather than an infected, because it kind of makes you realize that people are just as much, if not more, evil or enemies in the game than infected. Because in a lot of those zombie type games, you're mainly fighting the zombies, the infected, whatever you want to call them. So I thought it was a very important point to establish right from the beginning that hey, this is going to be a problem too. Just regular people are going to be just as much of an issue.
I'm just gonna say not evil, because I think with evil there's an intent, and that soldier wasn't intending to just kill someone's daughter that day. That was it's a whole like I'm trying to prevent this infection from getting out and getting to other people, and letting any sort of loose threads through could risk all of society. And that's the thing with The Last of Us. Now you can debate how good or bad certain things are, but I just wouldn't say there's really no like I have a hard time saying anyone's particularly evil. I get what you're saying, but I would say like it's not the evil of the world. It's just the cruelness of the world.
Yeah, I don't know. I lean a little more towards the evil side, but I guess that's one of the fun things about the game is that it's kind of up for debate.
Sure.
Is it evil? Is it morally right? Is it just a little cruel? Are they doing it for the right reasons? So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that makes this game so intriguing is there's not really a clear cut black or white of good versus evil,
Exactly, yeah.
bad versus good, whatever. So yeah.
So were there any sticking points for you with Last of Us 1? Like a lot of the big debates come around from when Joel's choice at the end of the game, and it is Joel's choice. Joel chooses to save Ellie and sacrifice humanity for his own selfish reasons, because he cares about Ellie too much to let her die, even if it would save society. In that moment, did you agree with Joel personally, or what were your feelings about that moment and about the ending of Last of Us Part 1?
Yeah, I did agree with him, and yeah, this is obviously the biggest moral conundrum of the entire game, probably. So the reason why I agreed with him, or not necessarily agreed, but I at least understood his point of view, was because so he, as we mentioned, he lost his daughter right at the beginning of the game. So he went these 20 years being just this like hard guy who didn't care really about anybody except he didn't really care about anything except survival. You kind of find out through the story that like he pushed Tommy away, and he's really pushed anyone away other than Tess, who they had kind of like more of a just survivalist relationship.
Yeah.
And so he's really just been that for these 20 years. And then once he meets Ellie, he's really distant from her. He's really reluctant to get into any type of emotional relationship with her. But as they go along, and they basically travel across country to try to get with the Fireflies, main headquarters, wherever they can find them. And finally, once they get to Tommy's camp, and really once he gets injured, he finally accepts it. He finally gives into his emotions, and realizes he cares about Ellie, and it's probably the first person he's really cared about that deeply since his daughter. So I understand from his standpoint of like, oh my God, this is I finally let my emotions out for these emotions that have probably been built up over 20 years. I let them out. I care about this person like a daughter, and now all of a sudden she's gonna she has to get killed, and I don't even get to say goodbye. If you remember, they knocked her out, and he didn't get to see her or anything like that. She was already knocked out and prepped for surgery. So
Yeah, they kept her
I-
unconscious from the second they pulled them like out of the water because
yeah,
she was not she was drowning, and then when the soldiers come, like they resuscitate her, they make sure she's alive, but to our knowledge, she's been passed out that entire time.
yeah, and they knocked him out. That's what I should
Yeah,
say.
they-
They had knocked him out, so he
Yeah.
never gets to see her. She gets prepped for surgery, and once he wakes back up, it's already like she's ready for surgery. So there's that, and so I get it from that standpoint, from his own standpoint, because thinking about it, like, yeah, you obviously you're putting the entire world at risk, but it's tough. And then from my standpoint, I was kind of okay with it because you had seen so much death in that game. Like everybody that you became close with, like Tess, dies from, well, she gets killed, she gets infected, and then she gets killed by the soldiers.
Yeah, she sacrifices herself.
Exactly. Then the kid and his brother that you meet.
Yeah.
The brother has to shoot the younger brother, and then he kills himself. There's just been so much death, like everything.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh my god, I don't want to see another death, especially from one of the main characters who I had become attached to. Like Ellie was a super likable character in the game. She was, I think she's supposed to be 14, 15.
Yeah.
And even though she grew up during the apocalypse, she didn't really know the quote unquote real world or normal world, I guess. She still had this like childlike quality about her. Like you remember she would say all those like lame jokes. She had that joke book.
Yep.
So every so often she would have these like lame jokes that she would tell Joel, or she would get so excited by like basic things because she didn't know them. Like that when they would go into a store, like a coffee house or a record store.
Yeah.
Or I think when they saw an ice cream truck, like she was so shocked, like what this people used to like buy ice cream from a truck. Like I don't understand. Like, so she had this like childlike quality about her and this like inquisitive nature about her. So she was a very likable character. So that was another thing. I'm like, oh, like I get it. You want to save society, and that's where the moral dilemma comes from. But at the same time, like I've become attached to Ellie too. I don't want to see her get killed. Like, isn't there another way? Maybe we can figure something out. So yeah. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but I did have a lot to think about that ending. I didn't hate it. I was okay with it at the time for all those reasons. And we can get into more of how it connects to the second game, because that's probably the biggest thing that connects it to the second game. We can get into more of that later. But first, I'm curious, how did you feel? Did you like the ending? Would you have preferred that they sacrificed Ellie, or were you okay with it?
I liked the ending. I think because it's very interesting. Since I didn't really have like a choice or anything to it, I just kind of accepted. Yeah. Okay, they're telling me a story. This is what it is, and let me just react to the story I'm being told. And I kind of was able to separate myself. I still think the situation is a bit absurd. Like when I start pulling it apart, I'm like, did they really just kept her unconscious the entire time? They didn't give her, like, they didn't wake her up once, just be like, hey, or to like let Joel say goodbye to her. Like they were just like, this is our chance. She's unconscious. Just put her under the table and let's poke at her and pride her. It was like,
yeah.
And I think that like speaks to the world, and I think Last of Us 2 also kind of points out a weird aspect once we get to know more about the doctor, and it'd be like the situation here. I'm just like, this doesn't line up. Like okay, like, and I suppose because of the story, it's meant to have these weird issues to it because everyone's trying to make hard choices. So not having to talk to an to a girl who's about to sacrifice her life is probably easier for everyone than like to just, well, she's already unconscious, let's just keep her that way. Let's just do our tests and see what we have to do. And that's where it's like almost, I don't know what it would have happened if they could have woken her up once to be able to go, hey, you're gonna have to because she doesn't know that she has to sacrifice herself.
Yeah.
For all we know, that she only needs to give tissue samples and blood samples, and they'd have to study her for a while. She doesn't know she has to die in order to save the society yet, or whatnot.
Right.
She just knows that she wants to contribute to that.
She just knows she is immune, and she wants to be able to provide the world a cure. But yeah, to her, at that point, to her knowledge, she doesn't know how that's going to happen.
Right. And they don't even like give her the chance to wake up and be like, well, if we wake her up and let her know, there's a chance she's going to say no. Now we know obviously post facts that Ellie would have totally been in regardless, but we don't
Yeah.
know what would have happened if they would have let her wake up, talk to Joel and say goodbye. Whether or not she might have even changed her mind if she was faced with that situation where she has to say goodbye to Joel, because maybe she would have even had a change of heart there, and that could have been a whole interesting story thing.
Yeah.
But Joel not also getting the chance to say goodbye and hear from Ellie, who, as we know from her motivations, would have been willing to sacrifice herself to achieve this. I just think like those little bits there are all absurd. I get it, and so I get it. I should say that.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if I agree with it. I understand where Joel's coming from, and I get his character motivations and where it's coming from. And I do like the ending because it's extremely interesting. And I love that cliffhanger of like, does Ellie really believe Joel? And in the way the game presents the information, it doesn't make it absolutely clear whether or not they were going to have the cure. It's only the meta information when the director like outright confirms outside in interviews that like, yes, it would have worked. That we can go, oh, this is truly a real moral conundrum. Do you save one person you truly care about, or are you willing to sacrifice them to save the world? It's the one or the many conundrum.
I mean, I like it. Kind of goes along with the game's whole story is that like the ending wasn't really black and white. It was kind of like, was this a good thing I just did, or was this a bad thing, or how do we feel? I did want to get into one.
I'll make just a small correction there, because it's like, is this a good thing or a bad thing I did? No. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that Joel did? We are not Joel.
Yes, we didn't have the choice. That's true.
Yeah.
Like you said, it wasn't like it gave us the option like kill the doctors or
I'm
go
emphasizing
away.
that point because that'll come more into the discussion with Last of Us Part 2 when I also comment on the discussions, what I've heard from people commenting on the game that have dissenting opinions of Last of Us Part 2. So I'm not trying to be rude to you. I'm just trying to point out, because I will be tying that back into future discussion points.
Yeah, no, you're right, because we didn't have the decision, so it wasn't our decision. It was just the way the game played out. It was Joel's decision.
But it is funny though, because they make the player do that.
Yeah.
It isn't just a cutscene. It actually stops, and
Yes,
you can
that's
take.
true.
I think you can like linger long enough, and the doctor will kill Joel, and you'll get a game over. But you have to move Joel forward to get him to attack the doctor.
Right, you're right. It's not a cutscene, yeah.
And you can choose whether or not to kill the other two, because they cower in fear.
Right.
In the background. So, and canonically you don't, because one of the characters Last of Us Part 2 was one of the assistants there. So canonically you don't kill those assistants, or at least you don't kill the woman, the female nurse or doctor there. I'm pretty sure it's a doctor, but I forget exactly. But yeah, that is something though that kind of messes with people's heads, and the game wants you to do it. Like the developers gave you the option to follow, or not the option. They make you have to follow through with it. And I think that's very interesting.
I did want to point out one more absurd part. You mentioned some absurdity. I wanted to point out one more absurd part about this scene, and then I'm also curious to get Mark's opinion afterwards. So another absurd part about this is that you're playing as Joel. Joel on his own fights through this entire Firefly army and kills them all. Like, so the Fireflies, from our understanding, are pretty much like the toughest group other than the military, and possibly in some situations tougher than the military, because as you learn through stories, there were some areas where they overran the military. So you have this military level group, like, and there's tons of them. There's a lot of them.
They spread throughout the country too. Yeah.
Yeah, and Joel on his own just annihilates all of them. I thought that was a little bit absurd. Like, I don't know. I find that hard to believe that would have been possible, but whatever. It's not a huge thing. It's not like a make or break, like, oh god, that ruined the game, but it was a little absurd.
Yeah, there's no like final boss battle. Instead, it's like this final gauntlet, and you fight these fully armored soldiers who have assault rifles.
Destroy every armored Firefly soldier.
Now, at this point in the game, you do have like an upgraded handgun, an upgraded shotgun, a magnum, a flamethrower, even if you saved your ammo. So
you have a lot of like ranged weapons. You have a lot of grenades or whatever, things along those
you
lines.
can make makeshift Molotovs, grenades. bow and arrow for silent stealth kills, as well as then you can take the assault rifles from the guys. This is where you get to use
Right,
the assault rifle, and so you
But
can
even
steal their stuff.
still, I thought it was a little absurd. But
It is.
so
Yeah.
anyway, segueing from that, Mark, I know you, as we talked about, you haven't played the game, but I'm curious.
Right.
You've played similar games. If you had this, well, I don't want to call it a choice because it wasn't a choice, but what would your thoughts have been had you played this game and you? So, like we
Yeah.
talked about, you went through this whole journey where you played as Joel, and you basically traveled cross country with Ellie. You formed this bond. both
Remind
as
you
a
of your dead
player-
daughter, who was tragically
yeah.
taken away from you.
So you form this bond both as a player with Joel and Ellie together, and then Joel himself as a character forms this bond and basically has been the closest person to a daughter, that he's had since his daughter was killed. So what would you have thought as a player? Like we said, you don't have the choice, but what would your thought have been? Would you have felt good about this decision? Would you have understood it from Joel's standpoint, or would you have felt like, man, this is terrible, I can't believe this happened, he just ruined the world, basically? What having been in probably similar situations in games, what would you have thought?
It's definitely a story of great storytelling by the designers, the developers, whatever. I love those choices because I've experienced them in other games as well. Like, I actually tend to just try to put myself in their shoes. Like, I've made decisions that don't necessarily align with what I would prefer to do, saving, this bus or one person, but it's like, you're this person, you have to make that decision. What do you do? So there's always trade-offs and whatnot. So I don't necessarily know because I haven't lived in that person's shoes per se by way of playing the game, but I love those types of encounters, the fork in the road. You have to do something. What's it going to be? There was a very, very big one, not to constantly bring Gears up, but there literally was one of those exactly in that game that could definitely change the storyline of the next one. And then how are they going to tie things up based on if you made this decision versus that one?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about the Dom moment from Gears 2.
Yeah. Well, that was Gears 3, but yeah, that
Gears
was
3, really? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yep. Yeah, that was a big moment as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that was one of the things I had heard before I played was from some people was like, oh, you're gonna hate the ending. Oh, the ending's terrible and all that stuff. But yeah, by the time I got there, like I said, I mean, I did get it. It was it was a moral dilemma. Like you have this connection to this person, but at the same time, like, man, you just potentially took away the chance of saving the entire country or the world, perhaps. So yeah, it's tough, but I by the time I got there, like I said, I did get it. I understood it from his standpoint. So yeah, it was very, very interesting. An interesting way to go about it.
Mass Effect and KOTOR, those are two games that have also brought it up a lot. Like, your decisions in games will have impacts. I mean, even in the whole series, as far as Mass Effect goes. I personally haven't really played a whole lot of that. I played a little bit of co-op with my brother years back, but I know that those have always been very, very positively received games.
Yeah, there's Western RPGs where morality choices are much more a thing. We don't necessarily see it too often in. It depends on the type of game. Last of Us is definitely not. It's not. Once again, you aren't making morality choices in the game. The game's plot is dictating what happens, and you can be more or less brutal about the combat scenarios that you go through, but very much anything that would be considered a moral situation, it's just presenting this context, this situation for you to for us as players to dwell on. Like I said, players are just forced to follow through with the choice that Joel has made. And so that creates something of a disconnect, and we're just meant to kind of figure out how we feel about that situation. So it's a little bit different in that regard. Like Mass Effect, you literally get to make choices that determine the sequence of events to a certain degree. Whereas Last of Us, it's more like you are being made to follow through with the character's choices, and your agency is challenged. And I think Last of Us Part 2 has several sequences that really do challenge the player's agency in their contexts. And yeah, I think we'll get into that. But was there any other sticking points for you, Paul, about Last of Us Part 1?
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit before we jump into 2 and how it connects to 1. So like I said, I really enjoyed the gameplay. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm typically not a fan of shooting games. Not that this was a shooting game. It turned out, I guess, to be
It's more like a
maybe
survival horror.
yeah, similar
Yeah.
to survival horror. But I thought the shooting aspect of it, because you do have to shoot a lot, obviously, you're trying to survive. I thought it was really easy to pick up.
Mhm.
I didn't have any issues with the controls. I think that's one of my problems when it comes to shooting games is sometimes I don't know, I can't get used to the controls for whatever reason. I picked it up super quickly. I thought it was easy. There's a lot of stealth kill opportunities, and
Mhm.
of course, like any other survival horror game, you're short on ammo from time to time, so you have to make that decision on whether to stealth kill somebody or actually shoot them or run or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So I found the gameplay to be really easy to get into. That was something I liked about it. I did like the AI as far as like Ellie being helpful. Like so you're playing as Joel for most of the game, except for the one section where you play as Ellie. But
Mhm.
I liked, for example, like if let's say somebody like jumps on you, Ellie will like smash a bottle over their head or something like that. And because she is so young, she doesn't do a whole lot as far as like shooting people for you or things like that. But she helps enough. Like she'll hit somebody with a bottle or
Yeah.
push them off you or things like that. I thought it was enough to make her useful as like an AI character next to you. It wasn't just like, okay, she's just here and she's not doing anything.
Yeah, she
Um,
progressively gets more useful. She starts with just like shouting at guys to distract
yeah,
them, then starts throwing bottles or bricks at them to stun them, and then eventually she's like stealth killing with her switchblade, and then she eventually gets a small handgun and she can also shoot. And you don't have to delegate ammo to her. She's just kind of an AI resource.
hmm
Um, Oh, it was like, and Mark, you'll find this funny. So she is like your companion partner, and I don't know how many escort style missions you've done. So this game is essentially an escort game, but they did something to make it way more tolerable, which is enemy AI doesn't recognize Ellie unless Ellie is directly interacting with them. So when you're
yes.
sneaking around, Ellie can literally walk in their line of sight, and the
Yeah.
AI just pretends she doesn't exist.
There were
Oh my
times like
god.
I'll be hiding or something, and she'll just be like running around, and I'm like, oh god, and then I realize I'm like, oh, that doesn't matter. Cool. Like, all right, that's helpful.
Yeah, so the
That
game does that as like a little concession in order to keep the game from being unbearable.
Right, and I like that because some people probably won't like it because it's like, oh well, it's not realistic. Ellie's right in their line of sight and they don't see her. But at some point, I don't mind drawing that line because sure, it's less realistic, but I would prefer the gameplay to be the better gameplay. Like
Yeah,
I don't want to have to worry. Like as it is, it's difficult enough to try to maintain your stealth and hide from these people. I don't want to have to worry about like her exposing our position too. So I thought that was a really nice feature.
yeah, especially since there's no system to tell her what to do. There's no like way you can
Right,
ping
right.
like AI go here and like stick to the wall. And I say that in a generic term, but yeah, telling you can't tell Ellie to do anything yourself. Anything
Yeah.
that's a directive of hers is completely plot related, or she automatically acts on her own. So yeah,
Right.
they just didn't have that system in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I wanted to bring up one more point about the first game
Hmm.
as far as like storyline goes. So I loved the whole story. That was the thing, like I said, that drew me in from the beginning. That opening cutscene, and really through the
Hmm.
whole game. I mean, as much as I did like the gameplay, what kept me playing, and one of the reasons why I finished it so quickly was because of the story. I was like, I'd play, I'd get home from work and then start playing, and then I'd be like, oh, I don't want to finish because like I want to keep seeing what happens.
Yeah.
And probably the part that drew me in the most, other than that opening sequence, was the winter scene where you play as Ellie.
Yeah.
So, to just give a very quick rundown, of course, that this is where you had met up with Tommy and his little like camp that he had built. Was kind of trying to get things
Jackson.
back to normal as possible in Jackson, Wyoming, and Joel. Joel really hadn't admitted his feelings to Ellie at this point, and he had expressed to Tommy that he was going to leave her with them, and that's it. And he told Tommy that she's immune and all that kind of stuff. And she
Yeah.
overhears the conversation and runs away, and they have to go get her and fight some people off. But anyway, that's really the first moment where there's that emotional point where Ellie tells him, "This is, you're the only person that's stuck with me. Everybody else in my life has left me. And, so you get this really emotional dialogue between them. And then he finally makes the decision of like, okay, we're going to, forget it, Tommy. Like, I'll keep going with her to the Fireflies hideout. And, that's it. So it's after that point that they develop this more of like father-daughter relationship as opposed to this kind of like cold relationship they had before where he was really unwilling to express his emotion in any way. So you finally get them connecting, and then immediately after that is where they get ambushed by a group of raiders, I guess it would be, and he gets severely injured. And after that, you have to start playing as Ellie, and this is where the game really. This is where I just couldn't stop playing because Ellie, it's a little bit more difficult to play as Ellie because she's so small, so you can't melee with her. Like one of the things I did with Joel a lot was melee because you are short in ammo. You could stealth really well with her because her knife.
I thought you could use her knife. She just isn't as strong as Joel.
She's not as strong. Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay.
So I shouldn't say you can't melee, but it's harder because she's not nearly as strong as Joel.
Yeah.
She is very good with stealth though because her knife doesn't break.
I
think with Joel you can only use it for a certain amount of times.
Yeah, gameplay wise, that was one thing that was really annoying. Is the Shiv system, which Mark, for your reference, there's a one-hit kill enemy that you're meant to only stealth kill, and you have to use a consumable item that you have to craft to make it. It's basically you take shards of glass and then you wrap them in tape, and then that's your Shiv. So they always break. You can eventually get an upgrade, I think, that like increases the amount of kills you can get per Shiv or something like that. But it's just one of those weird disconnections where, like, for gameplay, they kind of break the internal logic of the world. I'm like, how is Joel a survivalist and he doesn't carry a knife?
Yeah.
I'm like, wait. And also, it's one of those things where I get it's a gameplay system, but anything that breaks the internal logic or breaks from internal logic from games can sometimes irk me, especially when it's not as fun. So that's they fixed that a little bit in part 2, but gameplay-wise, that was annoying. So playing as Ellie where she's got the switchblade that's completely reusable and infinite, it's like, it's like, okay, that's great, but why doesn't Joel have a knife? And there's clearly knives in the world, like it happens. So it's just weird.
And once you play as Ellie, you get a really emotional storyline part where she discovers, I should say two people. There's an older guy and a younger guy who discover her,
David, and then the lackey or whatever.
And they want to trade. She had just killed a deer. They want to trade her the deer meat for medicine.
She asks for medicine.
She knows that Joel is severely injured and she needs medicine to help. So anyway, you play with David for a while. You fight off some infected. But anyway, the short story of that is that David ends up pretty much being a bad guy. He reveals that his group were the ones that attacked Joel and Ellie before and had severely injured Joel. And she runs away. They find her, but she's able to keep Joel hidden. They end up capturing her. It's discovered that they're a group of survivalist cannibals. Basically, they have their own community, but they, eat people, which is a little creepy. And they keep Ellie in a cell, and they're pretty much trying to convince her to join. The older guy is a little creepily attracted to her. I think
David wants Ellie to join the camp, and it's hard to tell if he's definitely coming across creepy. It's hard to tell if it's like a sexual attraction or if it's just like this weird, desperate, like bonding thing. But either way, it comes across super creepy.
Yeah, it's very creepy. So she denies him. She won't go for it. So they end up trying to. They put her on a table and they're basically going to dissect her and eat her. And she convinces them not to because she shows them her scar, making them think she's infected and they can't eat her because she has infected blood. She distracts them enough to get away. And there's a really cool scene where you're fighting through the snow and you really can't see anything. And I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, Joel has to that's how he's able to stealth into the camp because there's a snowstorm.
Right, Joel gets back onto his feet. He interrogates two of the guys that he finds to reveal where Ellie is. And pretty much you end up getting a final, kind of, I guess the boss fight is the final fight with David, and Ellie ends up killing him and kind of like letting out all her emotions. And that really was the part that I think made Joel and Ellie stronger than ever, because Joel realized like how much he did care about her when she was gone, and he thought potentially maybe she could be dead. Who knows what happened to her? And that was really the point where that's the point, I think, more than anything else that played into the ending of the game, because he almost lost her there, and I think he realized like what he can't lose her now. He's developed this like father-daughter relationship with her. So that whole winter sequence was I played that entire thing. I don't think I took a break. I just kept going. I was like, I gotta find out what happens.
Yeah, I think that also is a very powerful sequence from Ellie's perspective as well, because of how she was being taken advantage of and was very close to an extremely dangerous situation. So it's powerful from both sides, and it is a very big connecting moment. And I almost wish we could have seen more of that fallout with that. With do Joel and Ellie have any sort of conversation about that? Because that's a traumatic situation. But
Yeah.
it's not that they need to go in or glorified. It's just you know how, and everything in that game is traumatic. I struggle to ever
Sure.
say this gameplay is fun, because I feel like calling the gameplay fun undermines, disrespects the themes of the game. But yeah, like the gameplay itself is completely competent and enjoyable, and like taken at face value, it's fun. It's a decent combat system with a few little flaws here and there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole, all these different things are like, it's crazy to see all these very gray scenarios and bleak situations in games where you're not playing as a superhero or whatnot. It's very like, this is, you've seen this stuff in movies, and that's not meant to be like a necessarily praising or criticism, but it's good storytelling, and what you play through is strong there. Yeah. Also,
Yeah.
shout out to the side stuff where every time you
Mhm.
find a document, Joel like having some sort of little comment for the most part. There's a couple he doesn't, but then also maybe you remember the little side story, the environmental storytelling of Ish,
Yes.
like
Yes.
right
That's
when
a
Henry
whole
and Sam.
story that you don't get to see. That's just up in the sewers
Yeah.
and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and just for Mark, for your reference, there's a bunch of notes you find of this like guy who was at sea when everything was going down, and he like crashes back, and he finds like a small community of people, and they start rebuilding a society in these like sewer tunnels that are like nice, big, and underground, and only have like one entrance in, one entrance out, and they have kids and they're raising families, and
They
then
have a
all of
school, like a makeshift school.
yep, like a little daycare and things like that, and just someone messes up, a, a bunch of infected get in and destroy everything, and you find like through reading things like they realized everything was going down, and they like mercy kill all the kids and just kind of succumb to their fate. And all of this is told through just like notes and seeing the things in the environment. And I think you even come across like the pile of bodies and whatnot. It's just, and I think there's also like blood writing on the wall, like they didn't suffer. And it's just,
Right.
this game is so powerfully crafted with the world building.
Yeah. And that's
yeah.
one of the things I liked too, is all the storytelling through notes. You didn't need a ton, because sometimes I tend to like I said, I loved that opening cutscene. But when there's too many cutscenes, I tend to get bored, because I'm like, well, I don't want to watch a movie. I want to play a game. Like, the cutscenes are cool when needed, but sometimes I find that some of the newer games have too many, and
Sure.
I'm just like, all right, I'm playing another cutscene. All right, I'm playing another cutscene. So I liked this. Reminded me almost of the original Resident Evil games, where a lot of the storytelling was done through notes. So as you're going through the game, Mark, to kind of continue on what Ryan was saying, you find notes as you're going along. You explore, you find notebooks, diaries, just random scrap piece of paper, whatever it might be, and that's where a lot of the storytelling gets done. That's where a lot of times you find out, like,
It's all background for the most
right,
part.
if you're in a city, like, oh, this is what happened to this city, this is like how they got overrun, this is what happened here, this and that. So I liked the fact that you did a lot of that through reading. Like Ryan said, that whole part about what happened in the sewers with that little community, there wasn't a single cutscene for that. That was all told through like notes that you find, and different items that you find and things. So I found that to be good. I like that way of kind of giving you some backstory and some more storytelling. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, it's very well done and written, and it's just darker material than a lot of games in the previous, and to a different degree, that have. And that
Yeah.
carries into Last of Us Part 2 there. So with that, I don't know if you have like a whole a main discussion point that you want to go over, Paul, or if you just want to summarize your thoughts or whatnot there, because I've got like one observation I want to point out and put out there for discussion, and then I know we could talk about easily like the intro, the character switch. You know, though there's a couple of really
Yeah.
important beats here that that happen that are just intense. So, you know,
Yeah.
I'll let you take it away first. So, where do you want to start?
All right, yeah. Let's start. I'll just give my general overview, and then we can get into specifics later. That way, you can kind of give your overview or whatever
Mhm.
you want to,
Mhm.
because I've got a lot to say about the specifics. So I'll just go into a quick
Sure.
general overview. So, like I said, I played two in 2020, so not too long after it came out. I didn't wait as long as with the original Last of Us, and I was super excited because I had seen some of the gameplay footage and some of the trailers, things like that. So I knew you played as Ellie, and you're older Ellie now. I think she's supposed to be 19 in this game. So I was really excited for that. Because I loved Ellie in the first game as a character, but she was young. Like I said, when you played as her, she was more weak, obviously, because she was smaller. So I was like, oh man, I'm all about like older Ellie now. Like you get to play as older Ellie. She's going to be stronger. She's going to be more seasoned. She's going to be tougher. This is going to be so awesome. So I was really excited. And after having so much of a good time playing the first game, I was so ready for it. And overall, I mean, I played it. I got through it real quick. I didn't love it nearly as much as the first one. I want to say I don't want to say I was disappointed, but I thought they could have done a little bit more. So I think it was probably about a 7 year gap between games. I think the first one was 2013 and this one was 2020. And I felt like there wasn't a whole lot of upgrade. You know what I mean? Like in that amount of time, I felt like it was kind of the same game, which is okay in a way because as we've talked about with the Resident Evil series, I don't like when they change too much. I don't, I didn't, I didn't like when Resident Evil went from becoming survival horror to a shoot 'em up. But at the same time, I thought they could have added a little bit more. I felt like I was just kind of playing the first game again with maybe a couple added features here and there. Um, so for that long of a gap between games, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more, I guess. And then there were a lot of parts in the story that I I have thoughts on. We'll get into that later. But so general overview, I liked it, didn't love it, liked the first one a lot more. Still enjoyed playing it, but didn't enjoy it as much as I had hoped. Was hoping for a little bit more of an upgrade as far as gameplay goes. That's it. Yeah. So we'll go. Like I said, I had a lot to get into is once we get into specifics and storylines and things like that. So that's my general thoughts and general overview. Yeah. So what about you?
Yeah, overall, my impressions are extremely positive. It's one of those things where I also have trouble talking about it in like traditionally positive terms because I feel like it is a very uncomfortable game in the best way. I was uncomfortable. I was engaged. I was enthralled.
Mm-hmm.
I I love the story beats it hits in terms of just how interesting and unique they are compared to like other video game fiction. Of course, you know, literature and movies and stuff like this touch on a bunch of these things, but to have it in a more interactive feat with these characters that I've grown accustomed to, there's also some things it does that like that kind of highlights the way video games work and the way that video games only can challenge a player, can challenge that interactivity or that investment that you can't get from the more passive mediums of literature and movies. Gameplay wise, yeah, it's more of a refinement. There's some slight upgrades. Starting off with Ellie, of course, you have her knife for the entire time you play as her, which is
Yeah.
great, and it felt so nice. Some stuff's just kind of refined, but yeah, you're right. It's not too much of a leap. I wasn't disappointed because it still played really really smoothly.
Sure.
I'm trying to remember
And
what.
it was easy to. And the good thing, I mean, like I said, I would have liked more of upgrades. But the good thing about not having that is it was super easy to jump back into. There wasn't like a learning curve of we have all these new things. It was you can get right back into it because it was so similar. So that is a good point about that.
Yeah, it felt kind of natural. There wasn't too much else you could do, and it feels like if you put too much other stuff in there, it would have been a little bit more gimmicky. So
I I did want to mention two nice refinements. So, like I said, I was hoping for more, but I do want to point out two nice refinements.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned the word refinements, I liked that they added a run button. I hated like I think in the first game, you use the L3 joystick to walk, but I believe if I remember correctly, you kind of hold it down to run,
Mhm.
and I thought that was just so awkward. It was just weird. So in this game, they make L2 the run button. I liked that. I was like, okay, cool,
Mhm.
an actual run button. That's so much more helpful. And I liked the fact. So in the first one, you could like crouch down. In this game, they also gave you the ability to fully lay down,
Yeah, go
and that
prone.
gave you that gave you a little more stealth, and you could shoot from there as well. So those were two refinements that I thought were nice. As much as I would have liked to see a little bit more, those were two good refinements in my
They also
opinion.
give you the different types of arrows. I believe you can also do like the explosive and flame
Yeah.
arrows or something like that now instead of just the normal.
Yeah.
So those were nice little additions to the arsenal. I
Right.
think there's some. I'm forgetting all the stuff for gameplay because the stuff I really focused on after was the story. But I thought the gameplay was just solid. It really is solid, and in a way, it's unremarkable because of that. But it's it's so good. It's so polished and refined and to the point. So it's not like you don't really have to pay attention to it because it just works.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like the best compliment you can give it.
True.
Is that it just works, and there's the times where it is unique which we'll get into, where it stands out. Yeah, so I guess we'll kind of start from the top with the story, and we'll just hit the big one. Now, well, actually,
Yeah.
let me quickly ask Paul. Did you pay attention to much of the marketing for Last of Us 2 before the game came out?
Not a ton of it. Like I said, I watched some of the gameplay reveal footage. I watched the trailers. That was about it. And one of the reasons I
So
do this for a lot of games, I don't want to accidentally spoil stuff. So
yeah,
that's why I didn't dig too much into it, other than just some of the gameplay reveal stuff and trailers. So yeah, I
so
didn't do too much of that.
sure. Because my main question for that was, did you know, or did you feel like Joel was going to die when he did?
I did not. I had no idea. So let's get into that. Do you want to just start talking about that? Because that's obviously a huge plot point and a point of controversy.
Right, and just before we clarify that, because I did want to know, like, did you catch that there was the trailer where they faked out and they edited it so Joel was in a scene he is totally not in?
Yes, I didn't obviously realize that until afterwards. But yeah, based on the trailer that I watched and the gameplay footage I watched, I figured maybe Joel would die towards the end. Like I figured
Yeah.
he probably wasn't going to survive, but I absolutely did not think it was going to be as early as it was.
Yeah, when I went back and looked at the trailer footage, I noticed how much they edited, which there's that one scene where later on he's clearly dead and they literally swap him for a character and they recorded unique lines in order to put him here for the advertisements. And then there's also scenes where they took the flashbacks and they put the older or in-game current day versions in the flashback where the flashback scenes. So they even re-edited those so that you couldn't tell that scenes were flashbacks. So you were under the illusion that Joel would stay alive further into the game than he actually was. Yeah, I have weird feelings about that, but I don't really think we need to discuss those there. If we've got time later, maybe I'll touch back on that. But yeah, so Joel dies. He gets killed by
Abby. Pretty gruesomely killed as well.
Yeah,
It's not
very
fun.
very gruesomely.
So yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah.
First, well, before we get into Abby and her friends, just the Joel killing, because at that time you don't know who she is or who they are. You play a little bit as her before that, but you don't know.
Yeah,
what
you
their
play for
history is
her
and-
for a split second by comparison, and
Yeah.
I was like, "What is going on?"
Yeah,
So
I was like, this is odd.
So just how'd you feel about that like the sequence of controlling another character? Did you feel like what is this? What does this mean?
Yeah, I mean, I figured it would lead to something because I didn't think they'd make you play as her if there was no connection.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was a little odd. I was like, oh, this is random. Why am I playing as this person that we have like no background on? I don't know why we're doing this. We obviously get more background on that later, but yeah, I thought that was a little strange. And then, so then the Joel part, I I wasn't happy with it. I know, Ryan, we've discussed this, and
Mhm.
you have, I think, reasons why you thought it worked. Um, and Mark, I'm curious to hear your opinions about killing off a character like this so early into the game. So you don't play as Joel at all in this game. So I knew going into this, Ellie was going to be like the main character, and you were
You
probably going to
do
play as
play
her.
as Joel for like 2 minutes or like
I
5
don't.
at the beginning of the game when you ride the horse back into Jackson.
Oh, right,
After he
right. Okay,
tells
yes,
Tommy
that's right.
about how he lied to Ellie.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you don't get to play. So my I guess thoughts going into this game
Yeah.
were going to be it was kind of going to be a reversal of the first game where Ellie was going to be the main playable character for the whole game,
Right.
and maybe you'd get a scene or two with Joel where you play as him like you did with Ellie in the winter scene, things like that. So that was kind of my thought on it. So once Joel got killed, like when that scene happened, I was figuring, oh, Ellie's gonna come save him. He's not gonna die. So when he got killed, I was like, what just happened here? So this is where, Mark, I'm curious to get your outside opinion.
Mhm.
I wasn't happy because Joel was the main character of the other game, and we'll get into later why he got killed, and they kind of explain it, and it makes more sense later on. But like, I just wasn't happy as like this is the guy
Yeah.
you played as the entire game in the first game. This is the guy you related as. He wasn't necessarily always a great guy. We'll get more into that later. He was a survivalist, like we talked about. So he killed a lot of people. He made a lot of enemies, which is the reason why he got killed. But still, he was the guy you played as. He was your guy. He was the person you connected to. So the fact that you're very early into this game, you really didn't get to play much as him other than that small part that Ryan just mentioned. I don't know, like that kind of took me out of it a little bit. I was just like, oh, he's dead already. Like it's over. Like that's weird. So yeah, and Ryan, I know you have some opinions on this, but Mark, I'm curious to hear what you think as like
Yeah.
if something like that happened in a game you played, or maybe it has, and how you would feel about it.
I think some games have kind of dabbled. I can't think of one off the top of my head that's like
What
the
if Marcus
main-
Phoenix died in the
I
beginning
know.
of Gears 2?
I've thought about that numerous times, and I think it's truly coming. But like I'm already bracing. But I think they've also done it very well that I'm already attached to kind of the kids and the younger
Mm.
characters. You know, they're not kids. I mean, the one is a kid of or child of Marcus Phoenix,
Yeah.
now all grown up. But some games have done complete spin-offs like ODST, Halo ODST, where you're not even playing as Master Chief. Halo 5 then kind of started bringing in this new character, Locke, but everyone was just like, nope, like, can we please play as Master Chief and just kill him? Which was not an option. So as far as like killing the main protagonist
in the first sequel.
Yeah, that seems a little early, but like in terms of storytelling, like going back to what I was highlighting earlier, it's difficult to just hand someone, hey, this is sort of the series, these are the characters, and you can't kill X, Y, and Z because they have to live on forever and forever. Like,
Yeah,
you're putting creative limitations on a story that, one writer or group of writers designed for that experience. And I would kind of put the trust in them that they probably have an idea of what they're doing. I know there was a ton of pushback. That's kind of why I wanted to highlight the reviews earlier, because this is one game that it caught my eye because of the amount of review bombing people were doing. Just for context, and I wanted to highlight this. There are over 65,000 people that left negative reviews on Last of Us Part 2.
jeez.
Part 1, or the first one, there were only 662
Oh
negative.
my god.
Yeah. Granted,
That's a
there were
huge
not
difference.
huge. Yeah. I mean, positive scores, it was close to or a little over 11,000. It's night and day comparison. But I tend to watch most IGN game reviews, not all, but most that at least will be somewhat interested or somewhat interesting into the games that I play. And I remember comments were just coming out of nowhere, and it was just like, what? I mean, I read one to you guys right before we started recording, and it's just like, whatever. That's for another day. But the reason I bring it up, I know that there was a ton of attention with this, all kind of targeting that. So if he survived, I mean, that's what I was kind of curious to hear from you guys. If he survived, or like if he was in the whole story, like would it have been a very, I mean, I know, Paul, you already said that you really enjoyed the game. But Ryan, would you have felt differently. Maybe.
So yeah, I've dwelled on this a lot, but this game had a very unique launch, and it must be mentioned, especially in terms of the negative user reviews, which is there was unfortunately a huge leak of game data a month or two before the game came out, which had a bit of mixed information. So people found out about Joel dying to some extent. I forget if it was because I avoided the leaks once I knew they existed. Of he died pretty early, and people were already preemptively mad, like they had no context for it. And then there was misinformation about other characters and other sequences and events and stuff. So people were already forming an opinion without actually seeing the final material and the full context of the situation. So the game launched with a very weird thing. It's like, okay, it'd be like if a Harry Potter book came out and someone like spoiled the last chapter before month before the book came out, and people didn't like where that was going to go. It's like, oh my god. So there's that. People who never played the game and may never play the game, or even watch a full let's play of the game, were commenting and just mad at the idea of something happening. So I just wanted to get that out there. Second, this is the first of two main points, and there are so many, where the outrage at Joel's death is a mark of success by the writers, and by people being mad, they have proven that Naughty Dog made the right choice. First off, you wouldn't be outraged if you didn't care about these characters. So you truly care about Joel. Second, it is meant to be an extremely devastating event for Ellie. And because of that, if you haven't lost someone in a tragic way and someone else took them away from you, if you're not enraged, I don't know what kind of human being you are, but the fact that you were so upset that someone would take Joel away from you, you are now literally empathizing with Ellie. You are Ellie in that situation. And I think that is a masterstroke of writing there, that all these people just unwittingly played into. They became Ellie in that moment.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this when I was playing the game, because you had already played it, and I brought up my points about kind of my frustration with it, and that was the point. You made a good point about that, of like, yeah, you're supposed to feel that way, like you're supposed to feel angry, you're supposed to be in Ellie's shoes. So yeah, so I definitely get where you're coming from there.
Yeah. So in that regard, I knew going in, I'm just going to see what this story tells me. So when that happened, I was definitely shocked that it happened so soon. I was shocked how brutal it was. He's getting his head bashed in by a golf club, by the way. He's being held. He got first off, let me set the scene. So first, you helped the girl who was planning to kill you, and then her friends. You just survived a horde of, or barely escaped a horde of infected. She gets in there, points out, like, Joel has been, like, kind of trusts, because they were in a bad situation, and he understands, he's kind of softened over the years, and he's just like, you know what, it's just, okay, well, we're trying to take care of things, and he's got his brother Tommy with him, and Tommy is, of course, like, he's his younger brother. He's also a bit more optimistic. So they go in. Abby gives the sign to her friends that this is him. She blows out his kneecap with a shotgun, and then they tourniquet it so she can take her revenge on him.
And they knock Tommy out unconscious, so he can't do anything.
Yeah, they knock him out, and they just beat. She basically gets to torture Joel. So, yeah, and then Ellie comes in mid torture as she's trying to get to them, because she realizes something's up while they're out on patrol, and they're supposed to relieve Joel and Tommy on their patrol. And so she goes in they're like in an abandoned ski lodge, and they catch her, they hold her down. She sees Joel like already like beaten near to death, and she's pleading with them, and she's telling them she's gonna kill them, and she's just seeing him, and she's trying to ask Joel, she's pleading with Joel to get up and fight, and they're holding her down. And then one of Abby's I don't know, comrades like tells her like, look, finish it. Like there's been enough. And Ellie sees Joel get the final strike, and she watches him brutally die. And then she's knocked out while the rest of them escape. And then she wakes up to his corpse before she's rescued and stuff. So it's super brutal. The way, like, I didn't anticipate the way it was, and I was blown away. And I wasn't even sure it was going to be Joel, because there's a short section where they don't even say you play as Abby, and the group is like, the group is after someone in Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
and they're talking about a guy, but also right before that, you're playing as Ellie and what's the girl's name? I feel so bad.
Dina.
Dina. I was gonna say D, but I'm like, it's not just D. Dina. Thank you, Paul. Ellie and Dina are out on patrol, and they're just go into this like old I want to say lab area, but it's like an abandoned bookstore, and they find that one of their former friends of Jackson died, and they find like his secret lab where he was tinkering with like electronics, and he was growing weed in there, and you're reading notes about how he used to be a former Firefly, and I think it's alluded that he committed suicide or he just died of an illness or something. I forget exactly what, but when they're talking about it and they're like former Fireflies and stuff, I'm like, are they looking for that guy? And they're going to mistake that guy for Joel or something like that? And like, there's going to be a whole weird mix-up of things or whatnot. So I didn't anticipate it to be Joel, or that they were directly after Joel, but you find out, yes, they were looking specifically for Joel once it's like they hear the name and it's him, and I'm like, oh crap. So I was going through an emotional roller coaster all the way of like, is this it? Is that it? Is it going to be? No, it's going to be someone else. It's going to be a mix-up. So I'm just all these things. So I was completely thrown off, but I'm like, I kind of knew it was going to happen. So I was upset in the way that like, wow, that was brutal. But I wasn't like outraged, like, oh my god, I need to stop playing this game right now. Like, I was just more like, okay, let's see where this goes. That was really rough. Because then right after that, Ellie goes through Joel's house, and you get to have another calm moment where you walk around and just see these memories and things and whatnot. So it's, this game knows how to tug the heartstrings.
It does. Yeah, so it was, for me, it was more, like I said, it's not so much that he got killed, because I kind of had the feeling he was going to at some point in this game, but I thought it would be later on. It was the fact that it was so early. But I get what you're saying, that that was purposely done so you could have that connection to Ellie and understand why she's so angry, and you feel that way as a player as well. But yeah, so I was just like, man, I don't know, that it was so early. Like,
so
give us some time.
Yeah, let me go back, harken also back to Mark's other question, which was, how would I want it to be different? So when I was thinking about things, the plot point that I wasn't sure whether or not they would address was, does Ellie know that Joel lied about the Fireflies? Right. Does she know yet? When does she know? Is she going to find out? And is that, because if the journey, I was running through a whole bunch of different scenarios, thinking about what the game might go on before I knew what was actually in the game, was that, okay, if it goes the direction where Joel and Ellie are traveling again and it comes up, how's that going to affect the mission? Because it was already set up in trailers and stuff that Ellie was going to be on some sort of mission. So I was curious whether or not that was going to be a sticking point for the plot, is they're going to have a reckoning, and what's going to happen? And is it possible that Ellie might even kill Joel because she's so upset with him? And how will that affect the relationship?
Yeah, I kind of thought that too, yeah.
I don't know if any of that would have been more interesting. They just would have been different ways of going about the story, but what they showed here was definitely like, it's a very brutal, tragic story that they end up telling here.
I'll go through it a little bit, Mark, just to give you a kind of an overview, and I won't go too in depth here. But yeah, so you do get some Joel in flashbacks. So that when Joel gets killed, that's not the last we see of him. You get a handful of flashbacks through the game.
Yeah, because it's been like 5 years between the end of the last game, between the end of part 1 and the start of part 2.
Yeah, and you find out like Ellie, since everything happened at the end of the first game, she's kind of been feeling I think she kind of knows, and you alluded to this when you talked about the end of the first game, Ryan, that I think she kind of knew the whole time something wasn't right.
Yeah.
That like Joel wasn't really being honest with her. And she feels like there's no way, like Joel told her there was all kinds of other infected or immune people. And she found that to be strange because she's never met another immune person and just all this weird stuff. So eventually she goes back to the hospital, does some digging. She kind of finds some notes that might imply that kind of contradict with what Joel's story was.
She finds a voice recording that literally kind of points out from one of the doctors that survived that was in the room when the head surgeon was killed. So she says like he was the only one who could have fixed things.
Right.
Can't believe what happened. And Ellie could not let go, and she like runs away from Jackson to go back to the hospital and finds the abandoned hospital and whatever was left there.
Yeah, and she tells Joel, because then Joel eventually catches up with her, and she tells him like basically, tell me the truth, tell me exactly what happened, or I'm done, I'm not coming back to Jackson.
Yeah.
So he tells her what happened, and everything, and she is outraged pretty much, like she would have given her life to, like she thinks he made the wrong decision and it wasn't his decision to make and all that stuff. So she basically tells him, I think, to something to the effect of like, okay, I'm going back to Jackson, but we're done after this. So pretty much you kind of gather that the last, I don't know, couple years of the relationship wasn't very good. Like they went from that father-daughter relationship to like uncomfortable, like sure they're living together and maybe putting on kind of a facade, but overall Ellie pretty much is very distant from him now. Pretty much I don't want to say can't stand him, but really is very upset with really upset with the way things went down. So and I think that's something else that makes his death so emotional, is that based on the flashbacks that we see, she had like one emotional moment with him where she doesn't forgive him, but she kind of like gets back on his good side. But other than that, I think she more than anything else feels bad that she had this terrible relationship with him over the last couple of years and now he's gone. So I think that's a lot of what plays into the emotion as well.
Yeah, there's so much to that, and we could continuously break down every single plot point there, and that's the thing, because there's Ellie's story arc. I think it makes sense. Like a lot of people also don't like the direction Ellie goes in, but I think everything makes sense when you look at when you review everything and what they set up for the character of Ellie. She's a person with survivor's guilt. She's a person who has trouble letting go.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I think people kind of gloss over, is that she's a person with trauma, that she's living in a world where she can't get therapy and she can't and people are not emotionally sound. It's it's still post-apocalyptic. It's nearly fighting for survival every day. Even Jackson County is very it's much more stable than just about anything else in the world right now, but it's still living in a world where people don't really have time to think about their problems. And I think I was gonna say, just to while you mentioned Jackson, they've pretty much gone back to as much of a normal life as possible in Jackson. They've created a little town almost where they have houses, they have like a little bar or tavern, they have stores, it's kind of like what you would see in like the 1800s maybe. Like it's very it's not modern or anything like that, but it's a very normal like small town community thing. But like you said, it's not perfectly normal. Like they still have to go out every day and hunt for infected to make sure that they don't run on the city, or make sure there's no raiders.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not perfectly normal, but they've, about as close to normal as you can get for the type of situation they're in, which I thought was cool to see. I thought it was nice that they showed the very beginning shows that town. I thought it was cool to see that they do at least have some semblance of normalcy, or about as close as you can get to it.
They can have some peace. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do like dances. They have movie nights. They have electricity. They have running water. They have the ability. They have greenhouses so they can grow food. Right. They have livestock. They have horses. They have the means with which to have a small piece of society. But yeah, so that's the thing with Ellie, is she is a person who is troubled and has had these troubles from the very beginning, and no healthy means nor a healthy role model to necessarily deal with those issues to be able to be a more productive person. But that's also us applying our current sensibilities onto that situation, and we have to kind of take a step back for some perspective, because you have to have a different mentality in order to like kill infected that are previous humans, or kill raiders who are going to try and kill you if it means that they can get one more can of food or something like that.
Yeah.
Rather than try to join your society, they'll just they'd rather just do their own thing, and that in a way that's a metaphor or a direct allusion to modern crime and stuff like that. But yeah, the next point I wanted to bring up is there's a big character switch, and that's when you take control of Abby for real. So you get halfway through the game, you're playing as I'm gonna back up. Before you take control of Abby, there is a thing. Ellie is on a mission to find Abby and her friends and kill them all for killing Joel. So she is on a revenge quest.
And you go through 3 days. She's traveling to Seattle.
Yep.
And you go through 3 days. By the time she gets there, it's day 3.
Yeah. And you find Seattle is also like, it was a QZ, and it's slowly recessed further and further in from different attacks. And there's now there's the normal people who are left from the QZ, and I guess normal might not be the right word, but there's the civilization inside the QZ that's still under sort of like martial law, but has still once again kind of carved out their own semblance of society from the remains of what's left: running water, medicine, doctor, food, security from the military forces. But there's a splinter cell of the community that broke out and has essentially splintered off because of religious differences, because there was essentially a new Jesus Christ figure broke out in the modern times for them, and they've decided to live in this I don't know what you want to call it, what the short-term word is. Kind of like they're not Amish, but that kind of idea. They break out and they're like a sub-society.
They don't want technology. They're against like basically anything new, any like new technology or things like that.
And so Seattle has been flooded, so they actually live on an island that's just a part of Seattle that's in a that's elevated above water level. So they live there, and they basically patrol the city, also trying to scavenge for supplies. And so they're at war with each other. Like this more like the part of society that's still just trying to hold on to the modern old school values, and then this new like religious focused hermit's not the right word, but yeah, that like low tech style of faith based religion, and they're constantly at war because they both want resources, and they both kind of get in each other's way. And of course the war started because their religious figure got murdered, and so it's a matter of like they don't naturally trust each other, because they're going to constantly go back and forth at each other's throats. But before that, Ellie's sneaking through, trying to find all of Abby's friends. And at one point, Ellie is trying to figure out where Abby is. And she ends up getting into a hospital, and she finds one of Abby's comrades that was there when they killed Joel. Ellie ambushes her after sneaking past the security. And there's this fun chase scene, because you're wondering, is that person going to be this woman, is she going to like be regretful for what they did? And she basically taunts Ellie and says like, we totally would have killed him. Like and this woman doesn't know that Ellie was the cure.
Right.
So she runs from Ellie, and Ellie eventually tackles her as other guards start trying to come save her. And Ellie tackles her through the floor into a subsection where there's a bunch of spores, which is another way you can get infected, is like the dead bodies can eventually fester with the mold, and the mold releases spores, and the spores can infect you too, so if you breathe them in. So everyone's got gas masks. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Anyways. Ellie doesn't need a gas mask, but she carries one around in order to hide her infection from anyone outside her closed circle of people who know that she's immune. And this was also a fun little side note. I thought this woman was going to turn out to be immune too. So Ellie was going to like have to deal with, do I kill this woman to find out the information that I want, or is this woman's immune? 2, now I'm in a conundrum. Like, I thought there was so many ways, and there are so many ways that they could have made this interesting. If, like, what if Ellie ran into someone else who turned out to be immune, but they were on the enemy side, like the warpath? Like, what if Abby was even like immune?
Mhm.
You know, that could have been a whole thing where, oh man, this is weird. But what you have to do with that scene is Ellie tortures this woman, and I'm sorry, fans, that I'm forgetting her name right now, but tortures her to get the information out of her, and you have to press the buttons. There's no skipping the scene. There is no, and the camera angle is you see Ellie like break her arm with a pipe, but that's about the worst of it. Then the camera pans and you essentially see it from the woman's perspective. She's like huddled against the ground, cornered by Ellie, and you have to press the button, and you hear the woman screaming very convincingly. So props to her performance, as you are forced to press the button to force Ellie, or not to force Ellie, but to have Ellie beat and torture this woman until she gives her the information. You can tell, like, she's breaking her arm, she's breaking her leg, she's hitting her in the jaw, she is caving in her chest probably as well, or whatever. You know, you're kind of left to your imagination, but you see like blood splattering on Ellie, and you see Ellie's emotions and stuff. And after Ellie succeeds, she goes back to the little hiding spot that her and Dina are in, and the cutscene switches scenes showing Ellie's hand shaking because she's just gone through and done something absolutely terrible that even wasn't fully mentally prepared to do. And she was able to figure out where Abby was, and then once again she chases Ellie. She tries to chase Abby to this aquarium where she meets 2 more of the comrades. You have to shoot a dog.
Yeah, I'll get into my thoughts on that stuff later.
They had a military attack dog, and when you're playing as Ellie, this is the first time you meet this dog, so you don't even know. And this dog, you're like, oh crap, and it's just like, you have had to kill dogs before because everyone's got attack dogs now, and that's another thing where they added additional challenge. Dogs can sniff you out, so
yeah,
you have to figure out how to deal with that morally as well as tactically.
Yeah.
But that is a real life situation you might have to deal with. So anyways, you kill that, and then you find this man and this other woman who was the doctor, the female doctor that was in the operating room, and Ellie's is kind of cornered by the 2 of them because she was not expecting to, but she's got them at gunpoint, and they both have military training, and they're trying to control the situation, but Ellie's trying to get them to point out on a map where Abby is, and they try to bum rush her, and Abby ends up shooting the female doctor who was pregnant.
Yeah, which she didn't know at the time. She figures it out afterwards.
She was wearing like a coat, so it was hard to tell, but like it was, you find that and you realize that, which ends up becoming a resonant point because turns out Dina's pregnant, and while she's on the mission with Ellie, because her and Ellie have entered into a relationship, and Dina is pregnant from her previous relationship that ended just recently.
Yeah.
And so Ellie now has to grasp with knowing that she's just killed someone who was pregnant, and her friend's pregnant, and also is sick, either also sick or just having some severe pregnancy issues. But either way, yeah. And then she also kills the man as well, and leaves her map behind, which is how Abby eventually finds out where she is, and Abby confronts her.
Yeah, and that's where Ellie's scene ends, with like Abby finding her, and then you switch over to like day 1 of Abby.
Right. So let's talk about that, because right before that, you switch over and you have to play as Abby. I was going to talk about the boss fight, but that happens while you're as Abby.
Yeah.
So first off, Paul, now knowing who Abby is, and Mark for reference, and our listeners as well, Abby is the daughter of the surgeon who was going to operate on Ellie and save humanity, and he was the only doctor left who was skilled enough and had the medical knowledge to be able to save it. He's this very altruistic dude. He is like late. He kind of leaves the facility in order to rescue this zebra that's pregnant, and he was making sure that it was all right, and he's been watching it, and it got caught in some barbed wire, and he goes and he goes and fixes lets the zebra out and has been tracking her to make sure that she's safe and healthy and can give birth. But then they find out Ellie is there. The doctor is talking to Marlene from the previous game of the Fireflies about after he's examined Ellie and done X-rays and was like, it's the only way to do this, but I don't know. Like, he's struggling with it morally as well. He knows he could save humanity, but he has to take the life of this little girl. And since he has a daughter who is basically the same age, he's in a moral conundrum. Abby overhears this because she's super close to her dad and comes into the room and goes, I would want you to do it. If it was me and it meant saving society, I would want you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And while still kind of upset about that possible reality, it is enough for him to be morally encouraged to go and try and operate on Ellie before everything happens. And so everything goes off. Abby's still at the facility. She survives because she was nowhere near the thing, but she goes to check on her dad because she hears the sirens going off, and she discovers him murdered on the floor in the operating room. And so she knows the names of, well, she doesn't know who Ellie is, but she knows Joel's name. And so that's what motivates her to go on the hunting spree for Joel. She joins that, she goes to that Seattle faction, military faction, trains up to be a soldier, spends her whole life in order to go on the mission, track down and hunt down Joel and kill him with like 6 of her close friends who also were former Fireflies. So I guess we'll kind of summarize the whole thing, though, is like, Paul, how did you feel about taking control of Abby after having played as Ellie for all that time? Like, how did it feel having this whole Abby section?
I have a lot of thoughts on it. Well, first of all, I do want to mention Mark had to hop off, so.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, but we enjoyed having him here. I'm glad that he was able to get in some opinions, and I know he's getting more into PlayStation, so I'm glad we got to share a PlayStation exclusive game with him. But yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on the Abby section. Initially, after taking control of her, I hated it. I was really mad. I'm like, this is stupid. I don't want to play as the girl who just killed Joel. Like, why would I actually took a break from like playing for a while because I'm like, I don't care about her or her friends. Like, why would I care about this? Why would I, like, this is literally the person who just brutally killed the main protagonist from the last game who I played as. Like, this is stupid. Like, I hate this. So I wasn't happy at first, but obviously I started playing again. I continued to play. And as you go along and go through the story, I actually ended up finding I liked Abby better than Ellie. Abby I ended up rooting for the whole way. I thought so, and I'll kind of go through this as we go along, my reasoning behind it. But basically, I found Abby to be a good person overall. Like, her, yes, she killed Joel very brutally, but he murdered her father, like, and lost like any chance to save humanity and all of that stuff. So I was very so I went from being not happy to actually, loving the Abby character and, really preferring the Abby character. So, do you want me to get into my whole thoughts about playing as Abby and that whole story, or did you want to give some opinions first?
Yeah, let me just touch with my overview. As I've stated, I kind of just let myself see what the story was. I didn't really try. I tried to keep as many preconceived notions out of it. So when I switched to Abby, I was just like, oh, this is fascinating. How much of Abby am I going to play as, and where does this story take place? So you get the flashback, and we kind of grazed over the scenes with Joel and Ellie from that, but we'll kind of touch on that towards the end, I guess, because it does come back when you play as Ellie again. So yeah, I was just thrown for a loop, and I think it's very interesting, and I really appreciate it that we go through, and the game is trying to force players to understand that even though Abby committed this atrocious act, it's not that atrocious. When you see the context from her perspective of what happened, she was wronged first. Joel killed her dad, which arguably wasn't necessary.
Right.
And it's just this series of events where unfortunate events happen, and it leads to these terrible consequences for other people, and they feel compelled to make these other choices, which ultimately comes down to it leads into like the poor choices we make out of grief. It was so crazy, and then to see also like she's still human, and yes, we could have they purposely chose not to make Abby a terrible person.
Yeah.
Like she could have easily been they could have written someone who was more antagonistic and more of a villain. But
Right.
Abby is really just driven by like grief. She lost her father. Then the Fireflies as a group kind of fell apart, and as we learn later, they're not completely dismantled, but like their hope, a lot of hope for that their original foundation was built on, like dissolved, and Abby lost like that family, and that's what causes her to fall in with Wolf or WLF.
Yeah.
So it's amazing that they were so bold, that Naughty Dog was so bold to try and force players to empathize and sympathize with this new character. And from what you said, it sounds like it really worked for you. You came to understand Abby's plight. So let me ask a question directly on your reaction there. Now you said you ended up liking Abby more.
Yep.
Did you arrive at that before or after Abby fights Ellie?
I was kind of starting to lean that way before, but afterwards is where it like fully happened.
So was it like right after Ellie? I mean Abby spares Ellie, or was it during that like epilogue-ish finale?
It was after Abby spares Ellie.
Okay.
Yeah, I was kind of getting to that point already because I was like, wow, Abby's actually really cool. But yeah, after that, I was like, wow, Abby, like, I like her a lot better now that I'm thinking about it. And then yeah, especially after the end. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, yeah. So I'll, if you would like, I can go through my whole reasoning for why I ended up liking Abby better and why I thought she was just a better person. Um, which which was tough because, like I said, I loved Ellie in the other game. In the first game, Ellie got very, and I get why for all the reasons you talked about earlier. She was a lot less likable in this game. She was very kind of like emo, I guess you could say, and
Okay.
which is understandable. Like you said, she's went through a lot. She's older too. She's now like 19 instead of 14, so
Mhm.
she's more mature. She's not, but I kind of missed that more carefree. Her like that carefree side that she once had was totally gone, which is understandable. But at the same time, it made it difficult to like for me to form as much of an attachment as her because she was so just like cold-hearted, I guess is the right word. I don't know.
Yeah,
So
it's
yeah,
she suffered such an amazing emotional betrayal by Joel, the person she trusted most. And as we know from the flashbacks, like she had such great emotional moments. So that's what it's almost like the stronger that relationship is, the more crushing that betrayal was.
right.
And you can kind of see that, and that's kind of what causes her to harden, is the one person she really cared about. So it's almost like she had lost her purpose in life, and then she had no excuse for it, and she felt like she once again just felt aimless. She has this trouble letting go, which I'm going to keep
Yeah.
coming back to. And so she can't let go of the survivor's guilt. She can't let go of, or she's having trouble reconciling with the decisions that were made. And it's another meta moment. It's a smaller one than the one I want to bring up at the end as like a capstone.
Mhm.
Is the idea of agency and the player agency. So if we think about it, when I was thinking about it, we get to feel like how Ellie doesn't get that choice. She doesn't get the chance to say that she wanted to die, and we take that
Mhm.
away. But as Joel, that situation there is parallel to when you're playing as Joel and he has to kill the doctor, and you don't want to kill the doctor as a player. You may not want to kill the doctor as the player,
Mhm.
but you have to. Your agency is taken away as the player.
Right.
Joel is making this choice, and you have to follow through with it. There is no other option. So that's a thing there where I think people, when you think about it, once again, master stroke of writing mixed with video games where sometimes things are out of your hands. You have to make choices you don't want to, or things happen even though you wanted them to be different. So yeah, that
Right.
was another little meta moment there where I think you can really, where they really try to make you empathize with Ellie, and I think they
Yeah.
succeed when you upon examination.
Yeah, those are definitely all interesting points. It makes sense.
Yeah, with Abby, I think it's great. We see this whole other story there, and we see this we kind of see the aftermath. Like, it's also another thing is Abby got what she wanted. She killed Joel, and we get to see what that's like after. And it's also something similar to like with Ellie, she doesn't get necessarily what she wants, or sort of. So yeah, I enjoyed the arc that Abby went on, and I think it just showed a whole other side of society. So it gave us like that whole new story inside of the Last of Us world that people were also craving for.
Mm-hmm.
I did hate that it brought back the shivs. It
Yeah.
made even less sense considering that she was a military soldier. I'm like, I'm pretty confident Army 101 is have your knife on you. So like,
yeah, she played more similar to Joel, I feel like.
Yeah.
Her gameplay style.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. There was the with the melee and stuff like that. They another update they made to the combat was you not only had the punches like you did in number 1, but you also had dodging and like
Yeah.
the counters. So I appreciated that upgrade. You didn't have to use it too much, and it usually wasn't the best system, but it was at least there, and it
Yeah.
was nice to have.
I wasn't a fan only because I felt like when you tried to dodge, if you like mistimed it, you would just get destroyed. Like I had a couple times where I was meleeing and I'm like, I tried to dodge, but I was like a second early. And then I found it so hard to recover. Like I would just keep
Yeah.
getting beat on it. So I found myself really not using it very much just because most of the time I found that it was almost less helpful. But,
Yeah, I agree.
It was an interesting thing to add at least. They tried it.
And more for comedic point is that, well, that's pretty realistic. So, but that's one of those
Yeah,
things where it's like the realistic thing doesn't make for the fun video game, which is the opposite of the Shiv system where this is the unrealistic thing doesn't make for fun video game.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny how they have those two little systems there that are almost counterintuitive to internal logic.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, no, if you miss time to dodge and you got racked in the face, you're probably going to be disoriented pretty good. So
True.
yeah, but then the other side, which is funny. So yeah, but I guess I could talk more about my feelings when Abby, when I got to the point where, as Abby, you confront Ellie at the theater.
At the theater, yeah.
I was so distraught. Now, at this point, I'm like, I enjoy both characters. I get this. Like, I see their perspectives. I don't like everything that's happened, of course, but I'm enthralled with the story. I'm like, no, am I gonna have to kill Ellie? Like,
yeah, like Ellie's coming after you. I'm like, what is this?
Like, I'm thinking to myself, like how you had to play as Ellie and torture. I pulled up the list of names. I'm gonna do that.
I can't remember her name either. Yeah,
I think it's
know what you're
Nora.
talking about. Yeah, that sounds right.
I believe it's Nora. Yeah. So when Ellie kills Nora and you're forced to go through that, I'm like, oh my god, I'm about to be Abby and I'm gonna have to kill Ellie. And I just hated having to do that fight. I hated it. I'm like, every single time and every of those like little brutal like cutscenes where it would transition to the next phase of the fight, and I was just, Abby was laying into Ellie or Ellie would lay into Abby. I'm like, no, I don't want this. This is so terrible. And I can only imagine like that's the feeling they want. They really want you to just not want to be doing this. Which is why I say like it's so hard to say I'm enjoying it or whatnot. But I was engaged, I was enthralled, etc. All those other qualifiers, rather than saying that was fun or that was cool. Like, it's just that feels weird to say for those in context. So it succeeded when Abby let Ellie live, and the only reason she did was because Lev, like, called her, and Abby was like, you know what, this is not the person I want to be. And she had let Ellie live before. She let Tommy live before. She didn't even kill
Yeah.
them for like association. She's like, well, she didn't even know who Ellie was. So when it was like, if I don't even know if it would have made much of a difference or if they would have tried to capture Ellie, if they would have
Mhm.
known that she was the cure, because they would have tried to take her to some other doctor or something like that. Now the story's not set up to be that way, but it is like an interesting wrinkle that could have changed certain directions in the event. But yeah, Abby's gone through this transformation where she's finally been woken up and realizes like the grayness of society, and like all she can do is like not be better than she was the day before. So I appreciated that she let Ellie live, and it kind of sucked, and of course it was the thing where Abby was faced with a chance to kill Dina while she was pregnant, and Ellie, of course, is the hypocrisy sort of Ellie
Yeah.
pleading to Abby, like, don't. When Mel is the name of the female doctor who was pregnant,
Mhm.
and I was even like, oh, this is such a hollow thing. So I'm like, I'm not even surprised if Abby does, but is it
Yeah.
gonna happen? And luckily it didn't. Like, Abby just walks away and says, don't follow me, or I will kill you
Right.
next time I see you. And I was just like, I can appreciate this. Like, I get it. And it's just, and I was so surprised that Ellie also survived. Like, I'm just like, holy crap! Like, not even from her not being killed, but from being saved. And I think Tommy like wakes up, or someone else like comes and gets her, or something like that. Yeah. Tommy's the only one who would have possibly been able to get them. So they all wake up and they're able to take Dina back to Jackson, and they all just leave. Yeah, that was such a.
So yeah, the reason why I like Abby better, or why I ended up liking her better, is because I just think she's not a bad person. I mean, obviously killing and torturing somebody is bad, but like, so she had her reasons. She, okay, this guy killed my father. He ruined a possible chance at saving humanity. And like you said, after that, she was on a mission. She joined
Mhm.
the WLF. She was on this mission. Like this was her goal. She wanted to kill Joel for revenge. Like she needed to make this happen to, I guess, kind of like have her life have some purpose or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
anyway, but like you pointed out, so she kills Joel. She had an opportunity to kill Ellie and Tommy because they were both knocked out. And if I remember correctly, one of her friends that was there wanted to do it, and she stopped them. And she was like, "No, this isn't who we are. Like,
Yeah.
we did what we did what we came for.
Owen.
We got Joel. Yeah, Owen.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple others too who kind of agree with it.
Yeah, they kind of argue in between that. I think Nora
Like
doesn't want it, but
yeah. So anyway, but yeah, she's the one that says, no, we're not killing them. Like, this isn't who we are. If we did this, we'd be just like them. Like, we're better than this. We got what we came for. Let's go. That's it.
Mhm.
So she had the perfect opportunity to kill people that were very close to Joel and spared them and didn't do it. She did what she came for. That was it. Done.
Yep.
So that was reason number one why it's better. Meanwhile, you have the opposite side with Ellie, where she does kill everybody that Abby is close to. She kills all of those people that were there.
I believe it's Tommy who kills Manny, but that's
Yes,
but
that's
yeah,
right.
same thing.
And Ellie kills the rest of them as you go along. And then again, like you pointed out, she again has the chance to kill Ellie, Tommy, and Dina in that theater scene because she shoots Tommy, I think, in the knee. So he's not dead, but he's severely hurt.
His leg is messed up.
She beats up Ellie really bad, and I don't remember what she does to Dina. I don't think she shoots her. I think she just like knocks
Dina
her
was
out or
already
something.
incapacitated from like being sick and pregnant. I think she just like hits her in the head and knocks her out.
Yeah, because I think Dina tries to come to make the save, and she just knocks her out or something.
She stabs. I think she stabs Abby in like the shoulder or something.
So
to save Ellie.
Abby, at that point, has the opportunity to kill all three of them, and she doesn't kill a single one of them. Like you said, she spares Dina. Like, she realizes she's pregnant, and she's not going to do that. She doesn't do anything to Tommy. She just tells Ellie, I don't ever want to see you again, or whatever. So that's twice. So that's two opportunities she has. And at this point, not only does she have the reason to kill them, but like she knows at this point that Ellie just killed all of her friends, including her pregnant friend. So like she would have been probably justified enough to kill them, at least to kill Ellie, if nobody else. And she didn't. She decides like, I'm better than this. I'm not going to do it. She has Lev at this point.
Yeah,
And that's
she's seen the cycle of revenge, and her journey with Lev has like done the reflection of the situation she's just been through, and it's just
and
yeah,
right. And that's another point I wanted to make of why I think Abby is a better person is the fact that she takes in Lev because so Lev and I can't remember what Lev's sister's name is off the top of my head.
we'll look it up.
Yeah, but so
Yara.
Yara, yeah, that's right. Okay, so Lev and Yara are Seraphites, who are the group that they're feuding against mainly, like you talked about that
Yeah,
religious
the
group.
WL for feuding with, yeah.
Yeah, and she discovers that she got captured by the Seraphites, and those two were kind of they had been I don't want to say enemies, but they were Seraphites, and they kind of went against the rules. I think Lev shaves his head or whatever it is.
Yeah,
I can't remember exactly.
Lev wants to be a warrior, and I'm gonna try and say this the correct way. Lev is a trans boy,
Right.
and Lev was originally going to be the wife of, going to be married off to one of the village elders.
Yep.
But Lev wanted to be a warrior.
Yeah,
So,
and being a trans person in their eyes is unacceptable.
Yeah, they're
in the
very
eyes of the
traditional.
Seraphites. Yeah.
Yeah. So the shaving his head and defecting and leaving, and Yara also going with Lev, that is what triggers them to be outcasts, and even their mom, she's older and traditionalist, and she doesn't want anything to do with them. So it's so it was Yara was chosen to be a soldier while Lev was chosen to be a bride, and then that caused them to rebel together. So
yeah, and Abby forms this closeness because like I said, she was captured, and then Yara they had Yara as well, and I think they're trying to get like information on where Lev is, and they like smash her arm with a hammer and break her arm, and then Lev comes and saves Yara, and then I think Yara says take down Abby as well. And then they end up, all the three of them together run away from the remaining Seraphites, and they fight off some infected. I think the point where Abby really starts trusting them, if I remember correctly, is they're trapped in a building, and Yara and Lev get out. They're trying to, I think they're trying to get a vehicle or something like that, and Abby's fighting off all these infected, this massive amount of infected.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember her having like dialogue to herself, like, oh, I can't believe I trusted Seraphites. What was I thinking?
Mm-hmm.
But eventually they do come back to her and they save her.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point where she realizes like, oh my God, these people are like, they're just kids. And like, I need to trust them. I need to protect them, all that stuff. So anyway, so as she goes along, she ends up coming back and helping Yara because Yara's condition has gotten worse thanks to her broken arm. It started to get infected, all that stuff. So Abby gets the medicine that's needed. She comes back and saves them. But then this is the point where
Abby brings Yara to Mel, for Mel to try and save her arm.
Right. That's what it was. Yep. Okay.
Mel says, "Go get these go get this medical supplies." And then it's determined like her arm needs to be amputated. Like there's no saving this arm.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's where I really started rooting for Abby because she goes back to them. She could have left them, but I think she has like a dream or like a nightmare.
Yes, she's having nightmares.
She left them. Yeah, like she left them, and because she left them, they get killed. So she ends up going back because she knows like they're just kids. They can't do this on their own. So she goes back. So like she could have easily just left them and been like, well, forget it. They'll be fine. They're not part of our group anyway. So the fact that she went out of her way to try to help them, that was when I really started rooting for her. That was when I really went from like, Abby, whatever, to like, oh man, Abby's pretty awesome. Like this is a great thing she did. So anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on the story. So I'll kind of skip to eventually Yara gets killed, I believe, by the WLF.
Yeah.
The WLF then like kind of considers Abby a traitor because she won't turn over Lev. They end up killing Yara.
Abby's also opposing their invasion of the island because the leader. Let me just check his name. Isaac.
It's Isaac. Yep.
Who we hear a lot about Isaac and we see him just a little bit, but like, it's surprising.
He's in a lot of the notes and the like stuff you find, the written stuff that you find.
Yeah, but and Abby's also opposing, like saying like don't like we shouldn't be doing this. Like they're just people. I think she literally has a line like that. But Isaac's convinced like they are so against who we are, and there's just so little trust that if I just let them go, they're just like that. If he lets the Seraphites continue their society, they're just going to continue to have resentment, and the only way to make sure that the WLF society continues to have peace is to just wipe them out. Which, yeah, it's terrible. There's so much moral conundrum there because you know it's the WLF mistakenly killed their holy figure way back when, and it creates that martyrdom war. And then they have a truce, and then there's another person who gets accidentally killed, but they are killed because they were trying to steal supplies. So it's this cycle. And
Isaac's method is like kill or be killed. Like if we don't kill them, they're gonna kill us. So
Slash and
we
burn.
might as well just torch this whole village. And Abby, if I remember correctly, stands in front of Lev and is like, "You're gonna have to kill me."
Yeah.
And I think they're gonna, but I think something happens. Like there's an explosion and it takes everybody else out, and Abby and Lev are able to get away.
I think someone shoots Isaac too. I thought he got he gets sniped.
Yeah. So, but basically, she was willing to sacrifice herself.
Yeah.
In order to save Lev, which was pretty cool. So we have all of that with Abby, and then we get to the point where this is after she lets Ellie escape, or she lets Ellie, Tommy, and Dina all survive, I should say.
Yeah.
And she's pretty much just living with Lev at this point, and she's like basically trying to teach Lev like modern ways. You could see. You know, trying to teach him what certain things are. And anyway, I think they're going along.
Yeah, and the main thing is they're trying to find. I think they're going on a lead to try and see if there's other Fireflies.
Yeah, and they find. I think she finds radio, and they're able to get in touch with a Firefly.
Yeah, she goes to one of the old bases, and she finds that radio, and she's able to and she sends out a signal to try and find. And I forget if she actually makes contact with someone then, or she just hears someone else broadcasting.
Yeah, I believe she does make contact.
Okay.
But in doing that, as they're leaving, they get caught by a group called the Rattlers.
Yeah.
Who capture them and
just
take
another
both of them away.
Group.
Yeah, and then you go back to Ellie's point, and this is where I really dislike. This is where I didn't like Ellie, and I really rooted for Abby more.
Yeah.
So at this point, Ellie's kind of like living a good life. She's in a farmhouse, kind of in the middle of nowhere with Dina. Dina has had the baby. So you can kind of gather from what's going on that they've been living there now for a while. I don't know. The baby's probably not quite a year.
It's been like
old
a year and a half.
Yeah, maybe
it feels like
something like that. But they're living a good life. Like they're getting along. They have a nice house. Everything's going well. But to your point that you've made this whole time, Ellie can't let anything go.
Mm-hmm.
She's still having like visions of Joel when he was getting tortured, and despite having this good life and she's living with this person who she loves and everything seems to be perfect, she just like cannot let it go. And to further that, Tommy comes to visit them, and he like kind of gives like a lead on like, hey, we heard about like Abby might be here, which Dina's super bad about, and that kind of plants the seed back in Ellie's head of like, I need to finish this. Like, it's not good enough unless Abby is dead. Like,
and Tommy puts the pressure on her because now he's got the bum leg, his eye's bad, he can't go.
Right. Yeah. And and that kind of leaves Ellie with a moral dilemma because Dina doesn't want her to go. Like, Dina is like, this is our life now. Like, you can't leave what are you doing? Like, it's over. And she decides to leave her anyway and go out on her own to try to find Abby. And then now, again, this is another point where I was super annoyed with Ellie, and I found myself rooting for Abby. So you end up fighting through the Rattlers group, kind of in a similar way to how Joel fought through the Fireflies, where Ellie just like takes out all of these Rattlers at the end here. And so she eventually finds Abby and Lev, who are both just like basically near death at this point. So this Rattlers group, what they do is pretty much they just take people in and use them as slaves, basically.
Yeah. And this is like the closest group that I would say to actually being kind of evil, because they are intentionally just being like, if they're not one of us, then who cares? They're just slaves to us, and we'll just use them and discard them. And I would say like that's the closest I'd say too evil, like clear cut.
Right.
Like this is not moral ambiguity. These people are
Yes.
just trash.
Just bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing good about them. So yeah, so she finds Abby and Lev both at this point they're strung up like on the beach. You find there's a bunch
Yep.
of people just like strung up, hung to death, basically to die. She takes down Abby and Lev, and they go out to a boat. And I had a brief moment where I thought like, okay, Ellie sees that they're both like super hurt, practically near
Is she
death.
just gonna stop? Yeah.
Right. Is she going to just let them go and let them live? And like, maybe she's going to have this moment of like, wow, you know, I know I can't stand this person, but here's some good in me. I could see that she's been through enough herself,
Yep.
and this is it. But no, this is where, again, I was really rooting for Abby. So instead of doing that, Ellie decides, okay, I'm going to try to kill this half dead Abby. And Abby at this point refuses to fight. She's
She-
like, I'm not going to fight you.
Ellie almost lets her go, but then she has like one little flash of Joel,
Yes.
and she decides like, I can't.
Yeah.
Sorry. Please continue.
No, so Abby refuses to fight. She's like, I'm not going to do this. And one thing to note too is Abby is much bigger and stronger than Ellie, but at this point she's super weak because she's just
emaciated.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I think why she was able to handle Ellie in their original fight is because Abby was super strong.
Yep.
But yeah, at this point she practically could barely stand. So another bad thing about Ellie, so Ellie knows she's not going to fight her. So in order to make her fight, she threatens Lev, who's pretty much dead. Lev's unconscious at this point and basically dead. So she threatens killing Lev, and that's the only way that Abby is decides that she's going to fight her. Like, okay, I have to fight you or you're going to kill Lev. And now this is a part where I really didn't want to play because this is, again, a moment where you're not given a choice. You have to play as Ellie using your knife trying to kill Abby.
Yep.
And at this point, like I said, I'm fully rooting for Abby. So I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to kill this person who is half dead, who I've been playing as, who I like now. So that's it. And basically, you end up hurting her, but she does let her go. You know, Ellie practically kills her, but does eventually let her go. And then
she's got her drowning her underwater, and
and then goes back to the farmhouse, and Dina isn't there, and everything's gone. And that's kind of how it ends. So I really found that overall, just Abby was a good person. Like, she helped Lev and Yara before she died. She spared Ellie, Tommy multiple times. She spared Dina. She did the one thing she sought out to do. She got revenge for the death of her father. She did that, and that's all she did. And she was done after that. And I found Ellie to be a lot more vindictive. And maybe it goes back to your point of how she can't let things go. But like, she didn't have to be as ruthless as she was. Like, sure. And not to mention, she knows why Abby killed Joel. I don't think she knew that it was her father, but she knows that Abby killed him because he killed all those fireflies in the hospital. So she knew that it was justified, not saying that it makes it any easier or that it, you know, she didn't want to get revenge, but she knew that Joel wasn't a good person, that Joel killed all those people. I think the reason it wasn't so much that she was mad at Abby for killing Joel. I think she was more mad at herself for having that terrible relationship with Joel, and she was taking that anger out on Abby and her friends. So so overall, by the end of the game, I was fully invested in Abby's story and rooting for her, and I was kind of mad at Ellie, and I'm kind of hoping that Dina just left her, because we haven't talked much about Dina, but she was probably my favorite character in the whole game. She was a very good character, I guess. Like, there's a lot of bad characters in the game, or characters who are good but not, like Joel. Like we said, he's good. You like Joel, you play as him, but he's really not a good guy. He kills a lot of people. Right. So does Ellie, all that stuff. But I felt like Dina was like a genuinely good person, a good-natured person, and I found like she was kind of like a bright spot in a very dark game. So I liked her. I thought she was awesome, and she was the one, like I said, she was the one pleading with Ellie, like, don't go back. Like, we're here now. Like, we're living here. We have this life together. You know, don't go back. Don't, like, just end it. It's over. So I kind of hope Dina just left her and is like, forget it. I'm done with you. Like, you know, you had your chance and you're just making things worse. But yeah, so that was my thought. So so it was an interesting twist for me by the end. Like I said, I was really not happy about playing as Abby, and by the end, I was like, man, Abby's awesome. I'm definitely rooting for her. So it was an interesting way that they did that.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, Dina, Annie, and Jesse. Although you'll Jesse was such a nice guy that I was like,
Mhm.
he's gonna have a heel turn, isn't he? And he
Me
never
too. I
does.
thought the same thing.
And I
I
was like, okay, then he's killed, and I'm like, okay, he never was. Nope, wasn't a heel turn. He was just literally that nice.
So I had this weird theory that, like you talked about, so you the entire time you're reading about Isaac, but you don't see him for the longest time. But in all the notes, it's mentioning like Isaac this, Isaac that, like he's clearly the leader. I had this weird theory that Jesse was going to turn out to be Isaac the whole time, or something. Like, because I
Wow.
thought the same thing. I'm like, he has to have like some kind of turn here, doesn't he? Because I thought it was weird that he showed up in Seattle. Like, why
Mhm.
was he there? Like, why he just came all that way? Like, this seems odd. But yeah, no, you're right. Nothing ended up happening. He just got killed, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, I thought he was gonna be like maybe spitefully against Ellie because with
Yes.
Dina and the baby and stuff, and no, he was just her friend and stuff. So they didn't go that route, which was great too. Um, yeah, at Ellie, I believe you're supposed to be disappointed in Ellie, and it's supposed to come back to like Ellie realizes how disappointed she is in herself, and that's
Hmm.
that's why they do the flashbacks out of order where we don't even find out what caused um because there's hints of the conversation. Pardon me for just a sec. A little bit of a dry throat from all this talking.
Hmm.
It still wears me out. I believe as the player, you're supposed to be disappointed in Ellie, which mirrors Ellie's disappointment in herself once she has her breakthrough. That moment where she's about to get what she wants, but then she has her first positive memory of Joel in a
Right.
while. Um, and she remembers the actual final conversation they had, where she was finally ready to try and forgive Joel, and they have that extremely heart wrenching conversation on the porch
Yeah.
because she realized that even though how much she pushed Joel away when Joel defends her from the stupid drunk guy about the dance
Yeah.
with Ellie and Dina having their moment on the dance floor, and Joel defends her without any prompting, just naturally, even though Ellie was pushing him away and was trying to be mean all those years. Joel still he just didn't care.
Yeah.
She realized that Joel still cares about her, and that helped her realize like I still care about him too, and I really, despite the fact that I'm upset with him, I I appreciate that, and so that's so powerful, and I think like those are the emotions you're supposed to have.
Hmm.
So leading back, as you said, or like I've been saying, Ellie can't let go. She's disappointed because also she was about to start moving on and she was denied that closure. She was denied that chance for personal growth.
Hmm.
Um, the next thing is also meant to mirror once again the players and try to manipulate players' emotions. And this is the other meta moment I've been trying to get to when I thought about this. And I don't know if this is intentional. I have not heard anything said about this from the directors or developers' standpoint. But I feel like it was meant to be a meta choice moment. Because we're playing as Ellie, we're supposed to be Ellie, or feel Abby as well, and understand and empathize and sympathize with them at the very least. Um,
Hmm.
and the game doesn't really let you make too many moral choices, as we've talked about.
Yep.
But I felt like this might have been like a meta moral choice moment because Ellie can't let go. And it's the moment where I believe it was like this is like the secret alternate ending that you could give yourself if you really wanted to. And that's after the fight between Ellie and Abby in the theater. Ellie's taking care of baby JJ, and they go out and they sit on the tractor, the old tractor, and watch the sunset. At that moment, when they're sitting there and you're seeing the sunset, and it pauses, and you can hold it for as long as you want. The game doesn't force you to move on. And then after seeing what comes after that, and seeing how Ellie just can't let go, she keeps going. She decides at first she kind of denies Tommy, but then it's still bugging her in her mind, and she decides to leave Dina and go on.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this is indicative of, and even though like naturally with the game they want you to see the story to its conclusion, there's a
Right.
chance. I believe that moment where you're sitting there with baby JJ looking at that, and you're in this perfect picturesque moment, that is meant to be a chance for the player to go, you know what, this is good enough.
Hmm.
Turn off the game right there. And that could be you letting Ellie move on in happiness.
It's interesting. I never thought of that.
Yeah, because as you as the player, you're like, well, it's not credits. There could be more after. It's just like it's that idea of you can't let go. This experience isn't good enough. It's sort of, it's a little, it's fuzzy and complicated. And I know for a fact it's not like clean, but this is, I feel like, based on the themes, this really makes a lot of sense. That as the player, as Ellie, you could have made that chance there to be like, yeah, this is good enough, and
That's interesting. Yeah,
turned
that's a
off
good
the
point.
game and let that, and then had your life there. And maybe Tommy still arrives and checks in and says that, but then Ellie never goes on that journey. She never finishes that up. She lives her life with Dina in happiness. And it's only
Yeah,
because you can't let go that the rest of that happens.
it's funny because there was a point where I did think that could be the end of the game. I remember thinking that at that point. It was like, oh, maybe they'll end it here.
Yeah,
But yeah, I never thought of that as
I was in
making
total
a choice.
disbelief that that they were giving us like this happy moment. Like that is the giraffe moment of the game.
Yeah.
Is that sunset there with baby JJ. And I was like, my heart was pounding because I just kept expecting something terrible to happen because it's The Last of Us. Like something has
Yeah,
to
of
go,
course.
something has to go bad. I don't know what it is, but something has to go terribly. But yeah, upon reflecting and after beating the game and thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, no, like I feel like that is so deliberate, and maybe even looking back with Last of Us, it doesn't seem nearly as like the same parallel, but it is like the same kind of moment where you can just sit there and enjoy it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I feel like that was something meta that they put there because all the themes of what happens when people can't let go, people can't forgive either other
Yeah.
people or themselves. And it's like I think it was a moment for like with players that they kind of gave it as an opportunity where you could have the happy ending if you wanted. You just have to be willing to say this is good enough. So
That's an interesting thought. Yeah.
yeah, that's that's my big capstone meta point that I haven't really heard anyone else reiterate.
Yeah, that's a cool point.
So yeah, there's so much more in it that I think you could talk about, like as you dissect the layers upon layers of the storytelling and whatnot. And a lot of it has been already gone over. It's just it them trying to get you to empathize with the enemy and understand like people are oftentimes not bad. It's just they are making tough decisions in complicated situations where no one's truly in the right, the cycle of revenge, etc. Some stuff's more simple, and I think as you break it down, the whether it's intentional or not, there is more symbolism and layers to every single story beat
Hmm.
upon it, and that is why I love Last of Us 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I the
Well,
what thing I'm not sure about, because like some people have the weird sticking point about having to play as Abby,
hmm
and some people feel like the Abby section is way too drawn out and it makes the game feel too long.
yeah, it was a little bit, and I could have probably done without her day one stuff. It had a lot of like her and Owen and that kind of stuff. I thought that was kind of boring. That was where I was really disinterested. I started really getting into her stuff once they got more into the Seraphite storyline and she met up with Yara and Lev.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I really started getting her story. So yeah, I feel like they could have cut it down a little bit and possibly trimmed down some of the stuff if they had to. But that's just me.
Yeah, and I'd also say like with Ellie, like it was the first time I realized when she's making progress, and I think she's like almost to the Ferris wheel or something, and she gets washed away back in the sewer system, and you have to
Mm.
go back around, and I think then you go through the waterways in the arcade, and you have to fight that giant molded.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like when she got washed away, and you lost so much quote unquote progress because the plot pushed you back. that was the first time I felt like this is this padding, and then I'm like, you know what? Actually, like, sure, maybe in like the sense that this is a video game I'm playing, and I feel like I should constantly be making progress, and now I'm being forced to be pushed back. But you know what? If this was a real life situation where this didn't go right, an accident happened, and I got flushed back, and I gotta make my like, I just have to deal with it. Like you're not supposed to
Yeah.
be happy about it. Ellie's not happy about it. You as a player are not supposed to be happy about it, and that's just life. Like that's part of Last of Us as well. It's like you need to be you kind of just need to deal with the hardships and roll with it. And I get like there's that balance between storytelling and this being a video game, and that's where it's also tough. Once again, why it's tough to say this is fun because some of these things in context it feels disrespectful or not quite accurate to be like this is fun, this is cool when it's more like this is meaningful, this is deliberate.
Yeah.
So that's where I've struggled a lot with using uh, vocabulary in a way that I feel more properly captures the experience of The Last of Us because it is so bleak and full of grays.
It really is. Yeah, maybe. I mean, probably more than any other game I've played, at least. I think that's done intentionally.
Yeah, very much so. And that's the thing. I think a lot of the stuff is deliberate. Outside of like certain mechanical things, like I said, with the shivs and knives and whatnot, because like clearly
Yeah.
Ellie has a knife that she can use over and over again. It's certain like breaks in internal logic, but that's story wise. Yeah, I could imagine a bunch of these things doing different ways. I don't know if I can imagine anything more interesting. I think it could have been if it was different, it would have been interesting in a different way. But I don't really have any problems with the story as it is. Like I see where the
Hmm.
motivations were, I see where everything comes from, I see the journey that they've gone on, and I get where it goes. And sure, things could have been different, but it's like I think for the story they told and for what's there, a lot of it holds up and is very consistent, and the characters don't really break away from uh, break that internal logic.
Hmm. Yeah. What was I say? So I think overall, I mentioned that the reason I mentioned that I liked one better than the second one, even though I didn't dislike the second one. But
Mhm.
and I think one of the reasons why when I was finished with the first game, I just felt like I just went on this whole journey. Like I just felt like, man, I went on this journey with Ellie and Joel, and I just felt like I was part of it, and I was so ingrained in it. And man,
Mhm.
I finished it, and I was just like, wow, I just got through this whole adventure. I didn't quite feel that way after the second one. Again, not saying it was bad or that I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't quite feel like I had that same experience, I guess.
Yeah, well, the last one, part two, ends on such a dire note that I'm
Yeah,
like I was exhausted. It
definitely.
felt like coming off of a workout. Like I don't feel bad, I just feel just worn out. I'm just like, oh, this was stressful and satisfying at the same time because it's like I wanted to see the conclusion of the story. And I'm just like, oh man, and it's nice that Ellie lived, but her fingers are
Yeah,
chopped off. So she can't play the guitar, so it's like she lost the last gift she had
right.
from Joel. It's just and yeah, it was exhausting. So like that's the thing. I don't think I like it less, but it leaves me with such a different set of feelings that it's tough to. It's a very difficult comparison, but I think it does different things that are impressive in different ways, and that's where it's like I still think it's an amazing. I think it's a masterpiece. I do think it's a
Hmm.
masterpiece of a game. Um, and then lastly, I think like it changed my perspective on the title of the game,
Hmm.
like the title, The Last of Us, because it made me realize, and also through talking with some other friends about the story, The Last of Us isn't like about in typical idea of like, well, the zombie apocalypse tore a society apart, so it's about the last of the humans that are available. It's not about that. It's the Last of Us, at least in my opinion, I believe this is what it is. It's about humanity, your personal humanity, and it's about rediscovering your humanity in the face of this tragedy of the world. Like Joel regains his humanity from meeting Ellie. Ellie regain Abby regains her humanity from meeting Lev. and Abby, sorry, Abby and Ellie. Their names are so close. It's not fair. And then Ellie regains her humanity first. First, she grows as a person and learns humanity from Joel, then loses it because of him, and slowly loses more of it, and then rediscovers her humanity one last time from her memories of Joel. And like that's what it is. It's the last of our humanity. That is the us. And it was
that's getting deep. That's interesting.
Yeah, and that it took The Last of Us Part 2 for me to realize like that's what the title means. Holy crap! Because I just thought it was the surface level, like oh, it's the last of people, after a zombie apocalypse, and
Sure.
humans, the species is dying out. It's like no, it's about the humanity of the of us as people, and I was just like holy, like wow, like wow. That's the thing. I love talking about this game. I love what they did. What they accomplished there with the storytelling, and I think there are a couple other games that more deliberately play with game mechanics to make players feel things and use the video game medium in that. But this does it in its own unique way. And just in respect to that, not to get off topic, is like Death Stranding tries to do the same thing. It's a newer game. Nier Automata does things where it plays with the game and tries to play with players' expectations and storytelling. And then there's a couple others. Of course, there's like the choose your own adventure things, but it's different when it's like straight up like, oh, these are choices rather than the game mechanics. The mechanics of playing a video game used to create storytelling is so is what I'm talking about here. Because I think we talked about it off the or I forget if Mark said it on or off recording, but Mass Effect or Knights of the Old Republic, like those BioWare RPGs where you can where part of the gameplay is the choices you make and how it informs the plot.
Sure.
That's different than these more subtle ways of like what it means for you to have to press the button for Abby to torture someone, for you to have to be the one to let Joel kill the doctor to save Ellie. It's wrestling with that idea of I've had agency for all these other things and mentally I've been on board, but now I'm mentally not here, but this character is, and I'm still forced to comply. The idea of agency. Yeah. So yeah, if we wanted to spend another hour,
I'm sure we
have
could
more to
easily
talk about. Yeah.
It's definitely something we got pretty in depth, and I feel like it's something we can get even more in depth with if we needed to.
If we went through the entire plot, I'm sure we could spend at least an hour per plot beat just dissecting what this means and how it plays into the theme. So.
Oh yeah.
Now I'm feeling satisfactorily exhausted as well. Reliving
I was just gonna say
all that. So Paul, did you have any final thoughts about The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2?
No, I think we covered just about everything. Yeah, I mean, great series. Like I said, I did enjoy the first game more. I was a little disappointed with the second game. Like I said, not to say that it was bad or I didn't like it, but still, overall, I mean, just great series. Can't say enough about it. Like you said, from whether it's the storytelling or whatever it might be, it's everything about it is pretty perfect. Certainly going to go down as one of the best video game series of all time. So yeah, that's my final thought.
I think it's extremely inspiring. Inspiring.
It's expired.
So yeah, we'll leave off with these last two comments here. Last of Us themed, then a little off topic. I don't need another game in the Last of Us universe. I think they could still create a story if they really wanted to. It could be new characters. It could be related to stuff. I don't like personally. I don't need it. If they make it, if they do decide and announce something, I will be, I will take a look and I'll give it an honest thought. But like, I'm not begging Naughty Dog make another one. I need more. Like, I need to see where Ellie goes next. Like, I'm curious, of course, but I'm not aching for it. but
Yeah.
I will be okay with whatever they choose, whether that is we'll never see another story in the Last of Us universe or we do get another one. I'm satisfied. I'm good. What about you?
Interesting. I felt a little unfulfilled. I would like to see another story.
Okay.
I thought I would like to see what happens to Ellie. It just kind of ended with who knows. Like, did Dina leave her? Did she just go back to Jackson? Is Ellie going to go back to Jackson?
Yeah.
What happened to Abby and Lev? Did they meet up with the Fireflies? Were they the Fireflies? Was it another group? Who knows what? So I'm kind of I'd be interested in another game.
Yeah, so I think this is also another meta element. The after you beat the game, you know how the title screen changes in the boats on the shore?
Yeah.
That's supposed to confirm that yeah, they did make it. Like they made it and they went and met the
Okay, I think I
Fireflies.
did hear that
Yeah.
theory of that they did make it. Yeah. Okay. So.
Oh no,
Yeah.
from the director's interview, if I'm
Oh, it is.
understanding it
Okay.
properly, he said like, well, they definitely made it to the beach. Um, but I think he also said, yeah, they met the Fireflies. They met that group of Fireflies there. They made it to the point.
Okay.
So we don't know what happened after that, but
Right.
that's supposed to be like a subtle confirmation that yes, like Levin, and Abby did make it. So yeah, but what happens to Ellie next? Is she going to try and go back to Jackson and try and pick things up, or is she just going to move on and just kind of um finally leave stuff behind? That's completely up in the air, and I'll be curious to see if we ever find out.
Yeah, we shall see.
So off topic, last fun little note, because Naughty Dog makes amazing games, and I haven't really played Uncharted, but I respect the games from afar, and I respect the genre of the way that works. And Last of Us is a very similar one, just with different tones. You remember the superhero collectible cards that were in Last of Us Part Two?
Yeah.
I hope Naughty Dog's next game is like that universe. Like it's superheroes, and that was just kind of a setup for all their characters and factions and things like that. I would love to see that.
That would be pretty cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I that's another part of I know we're finishing up here, so I don't want to get into a whole new discussion, but that's another part of Last of Us I like is the little side stuff. I know some people probably don't care about it, but I like trying to find the cards. And for Abby, it's the coins. It's very it's kind of the Resident Evil in me. Like when I go into a room, I explore every tiny section of the room. Like I make sure that everything's been touched in there. Like I don't want to leave everything. So I kind of appreciate the little stuff that they throw in there like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't really like collectibles in general. I think they're pretty much pointless. But when it's like the notes where it's got some world building to it, I think that's really neat, and I appreciate that. And I thought the cards were neat simply because the premise started becoming compelling, and especially if like the characters like make little comments or things when they pick things up. Like like when Joel, like him commenting about each of the notes, I was like, yeah, I would definitely, it encourages me if there's something that's more present to the game there. And of course, if in the most shallowest sense, if the collectibles would have led to me getting like an upgrade or something, I totally would have hunted them all down. Especially if if the upgrade I would have thought was like worthwhile.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's like I like to play more to the core experience and what's going to help me play through that core thing. And I try not to get bogged down by extras anymore because I just realize like I want to play more games rather than get then just sink my time into stuff that's like, no, like it's post game. I already done everything I want to do.
Yeah.
But I do like all the accessibility and difficulty modifier settings that they've added to The Last of Us Part 2. And especially with like the new art filters that they added, like there's one that's very comic booky looking. I'm like, ooh, I could tweak this to try and see if I can make the game much more tolerable. Because there's certain things that I'm just like, this. I think the difficulty balancing, like between the enemies when they choose to be more aggressive versus, I hate the fact that they don't follow the rules of ammo like you have to as a character. So it's like, oh, they have infinite.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because when you kill them, the last bullet they shot is always the last bullet that's in their magazine. But if you never kill them, they always have more ammo, and yet you still can't like pick up a bullet. Like, and I get that's game balancing mechanics, but that's where it's like, I'd love to. I like fussing with those things. So that's pretty neat. Those are just some cool, straight up like gameplay fun points and whatnot. So yeah, no, this has been a great conversation, Paul, and thanks Mark for being here. I hope you'll listen, and we'll let you talk, and maybe we'll add Mark's comments in on the end if there's anything else if we do a follow up. But
Yeah.
we'll see about that. We're not going to force it. Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to bringing you another episode in the future.
See you later.